Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. The need to communicate and collaborate on a global level has created a proliferation of cloud-based tools for businesses. But with new channels come new gaps for hackers and many new security blind spots. You need full threat visibility across channels with a solution that works at the speed your company does. Perception Point's multi-layered platform provides the most robust threat prevention on the market. Perception Point Advanced Collaboration Security designs for the modern enterprise. Visit securityweekly.com/Perception Point. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Make sure that you visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. We've got an entire network of podcasts, tons of content each week. You can subscribe to all of them on your favorite podcast catcher. Make sure you leave us a review. That would be great. Also, when you go to securityweekly.com/subscribe, Security Weekly show starter packs are available. There's a link if you want to remember another URL. securityweekly.com/starter packs. Especially if you use Spotify, I've created 3 Spotify playlists where I've pulled content from our archives. Like in the 400s, and we're talking 300 plus episodes ago. In the 400s, we hit our stride. You ready for the list? Jason Street, Karen Elazari, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, as well as Michael Bazell and no, that's not Marcus Random. I don't know who that is, but that's the list right there, and that's just the 400s that I'm talking about. So make sure you go back. We have such a long history of podcasting, right?
We're long and we're strong, and we're down to get the podcast on,
and we are. But one of the things, like I feel like when we were in the 300-ish range, we'd get feedback and people would be like, yeah, so I started from episode 1 and I listened, right? Like all the way up to I feel like we're in the 300s where I really didn't hear. And there's a lot more podcasts today, right, than there were when we were doing episodes in the 300s. So you were like, oh, like I've listened to a lot of the security podcast, and one of the things I'll do is I'll go back and listen to the entire archive. I've saved you the trouble today. If you want to go listen to some really cool episodes from our archives, you can go to securityweekly.com/starter packs and have Spotify playlist, which you can add the playlist when you get in your car, and you can listen to them just like you would a podcast, which is awesome.
And then, so after you do the starter packs, you should have the expansion packs.
Right. The add-on. The add-on
just
packs.
like they do with Pokemon.
And
is that DLC? Is that downloadable content? And is there a microtransaction you have to do for that?
No, I was going to say, and you can buy add-ons during you're listening.
No, there's nothing to buy. This is all free. That's the beauty. It's all free, and I'm going to do more as well. So, like,
with in-app purchases.
I didn't go back prior to there's a magical episode where we changed the name. And that was also kind of the cutoff point for audio being kind of rough. So when we go back further, it's going to require a little bit of audio engineering, clean some of that stuff up, a little bit of editing, because it references stuff that, like, I forgot we even did. Like, we created a Ning community. Does anyone remember Ning? Like, raise your hand if you remember Ning. And you probably didn't until I said that you probably forgot all about it, right?
Oh, my God.
And do you
was a social network.
Map? It was a Frapper map. There was a Flickr account. In one episode, you're like, check out our Flickr account of the beer we're drinking, right? So we're going to go back and edit, like, a lot of that stuff out so you can cut right to the content. Because going back in the archives now is, like, really painful for a lot of reasons. So my goal is to make that easier for you.
That war.
You should pull the Flickr.
You remember that time when you could right-click and view sourse?
Yes.
And you could look at
see the PHP code?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
You should pull down the Flickr account images and put them up on, like, Instagram, because that's going to last so much longer.
Yeah.
We'll have to TikTok it while we're at
it. Oh, what's interesting now, I don't know if you guys remember this, episode 371, part 1 of 3, ironically enough, like May 1st, 2014, like almost to the day.
Uh-huh.
What is that, 8 years ago now?
Yep.
Any guess who we interviewed? Anyone make a guess? He's big on Star Wars, and he's an article in our news segment today. Mr. Adam Shostak.
Oh, wow.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
Adam Shostak. Now, I understand, too. You hear me say that name, and people have made allegations.
Mm-hmm.
I don't claim any kind of knowledge about said allegations from either side. I just want to acknowledge it. I have nothing other than like what I've read in what's been posted out there and what people have told me. So I don't know.
Yep. Innocent until proven guilty,
so
or
that's
something
the,
like
I mean,
that.
but I don't want to offend either side of the party. Like,
Understood.
I want to be very neutral on this issue. That being said, I saw an article that was what Star Wars teaches us about threats. Adam is, of course, famous in our industry for talking about the parallels between cybersecurity and Star Wars. And he also has a new book coming out, which is called Threats, Why Every Engineer Should Learn from Star Wars, that's coming out this fall, which I want to read. Because I think Adam has some very interesting viewpoints and thoughts and opinions on this matter. In Star Wars, I think those of us nerds that watch Star Wars, we always make those security parallels, right? And not just the thermal exhaust port. Okay. I did a webcast a while back. I should probably go back to this and turn it into a podcast or something else. Rogue One really got me thinking about how it relates to security. There've been a few articles, written about Rogue One and its parallels into security, protection of data, physical security, all those things, certainly come into play. But if we apply basic common sense security, sometimes the movies would end really quickly. There's no life forms aboard that pod. Don't shoot it down. They're conserving lasers is the theory. Conserving lasers, right?
Not shoot it
down. But then you see a battle in
been
Star Wars, and there's lasers flying all over the place. There's lasers, but if you really had to conserve them,
Now, well, they also made assumptions. Must have been a malfunction.
Right. Must have been a malfunction.
Or you just got data ports set all over the place and anybody can plug into them.
They're universal data ports in Star Wars.
I mean, at least they're standardized.
Well, yeah, which is unusual because I heard the Empire just was impossible to get as a contractor.
You would think that but what's interesting is the data ports in Star Wars cross both the Empire and the Rebel. All of the technology has these standards. You would think the Empire, being the Empire, would have proprietary data ports.
You think that, but nobody can get approved as a vendor. It's once you get in their vendor system, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that and if you think about it on the converse, C-3PO, do you speak the language of binary load lifters? No, but I speak this other language that's very similar. Mm-hmm. So there's thousands of languages and potentially thousands of data ports. You just got to have the right adapter and know the right language.
But he's not allowed to speak Sith.
Right.
Yeah, that was a weird plot.
He's not a very good storyteller either.
No.
Well, I mean, it's code, so you could block him from speaking Sith just by putting, no Sith.
You
can't get around it. I mean,
legit
he's a robot.
Right.
It's sorry, I could, but I'm not allowed to by my code.
We can talk about. We don't have to worry about spoilers, right?
Ooh, you could do a bot UEFI attack.
Yes.
We replaced C-3PO's firmware, and now he can speak Sith.
Mm-hmm. I heard C-3PO ran UEFI. Mm-hmm. I heard that.
Man,
and server messaging block 1.
We have UEFI, and then that far in the future, we're doomed.
We're doomed.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Well, that was an early draft of episode 4. Was that the whole thing was just a UEFI attack, but it was a really boring movie.
And required a bottle of gin.
Yeah, there's a couple of nerds sitting around in a base on Hoth typing for 2.5 hours.
Oh,
I go to read the UFI spec.
So Tron,
the latest UFI spec is 2,500 plus pages, and I'm like, maybe I can read some articles about the spec.
Maybe I can read the cliff notes. Right?
I need to read the cliff notes and the cliff notes literally say, "Oh, you can read about this in the UFI spec, but when you read the UFI spec, make sure you have a bottle of gin." I'm like, oh, okay.
And Denny had to learn Chinese.
Yes, yes,
and to like gin.
I like gin. I love gin. Right, actually,
gin is good. Good gin.
Prove it. Drink some now.
We have some good gin.
Yeah, I brought gin
Somewhere
here
over
before,
there.
and it all disappeared. Somebody drank it.
Qui-Gon Jinn.
Qui-Gon.
I see some botanist over there. I see.
Yeah, Botanist is good. Miller's is good.
Yeah, botanist.
What is that? Monkey.
37 Monkeys.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Uh-huh.
My wife is the gin connoisseur, so yeah. By her standards, botanist is it's all right.
It's just
yeah,
all right,
it's not-
really. This is like a fresh bottle. Goes to show you how much we like this gin. Anybody want some gin?
No, thank you.
Yes,
If you
please.
cut it with scotch.
You good? You good? Okay.
Oh, wow.
Just for you, Josh.
Straight out of the bottle.
Ready to read my Eufy spec.
It's it's self-sanitizing, so it's all good.
It's all good.
There you go.
It's
You
my
need
bottle
the
now.
rest.
What were we talking about? Star Wars?
Gin.
Botnet. Botnet is a good one.
We don't want to talk about Star Wars anymore?
And threats. I mean, I do.
I do too.
I mean, we could go on like Star Wars for hours.
Did you do the lightsaber? Anyone do the lightsaber building at Savi's workshop yet?
Twice.
You did it twice. Now, did you swap out your crystals and stuff like that afterwards?
Several times.
Yeah. So you ordered them like I did on Amazon, and
No, I bought them in park.
you bought them. Oh, so you bought extras in the park.
Like 30 of them.
Oh, so you have every color.
Because they're NFC.
They are. I was gonna say.
They're RFID.
I realized
They're
when I was.
RFID.
I got the lightsabers home, and I'm like, I want to take these apart and like dig into them. I'm like,
They're RFID.
holy crap! I'm like, they're NFC.
They're RFID.
In the crystal. Is it NFC or
It's RFID.
It's RFID.
I will send you some links later. There's a whole bunch of stuff documented.
Yeah.
And the kyber crystals are writable.
Oh, it's a writable RFID.
So you can-
So wait, you can buy a blue crystal
Yep.
and you can reprogram it to be whatever color you want.
Black,
Oh,
yellow.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Because the microcontroller inside the lightsaber just reads the RFID signal to say what color it's going to. Because I blew my kid's mind. Like, I took the blade out and I was like swapping blades and like, Dad, doesn't that swipe the color? I'm like, no. I'm like, the color is determined by the crystal. They're like, nah. They're like, Dad, I want the purple one that's in yours. I'm like, all right, let's swap. And they were like blown away. They're like, oh, that's really cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're doing a lot of lightsaber.
I want to show up to a client site with my lightsaber, and I want to like lightsaber the door and have it open with my RFID from the
Oh,
crystal.
that'd be cool.
So
Swing.
to
And the door opens.
the inside baseball conversation, we do some RFID stuff in the SAN 617 wireless class, and we have a couple of case studies about how RFID goes bad because of design decisions that were made, not necessarily about implementation decisions that were bad, and not necessarily failures in the RFID technology. And we cover the Amiibo stuff with the Nintendo and how that the keys are stored on the device. You recover the keys from the device. That means you can decrypt all of the Amiibo characters and you can effectively clone them all. And that became a big deal pandemic timeframe, early 2020, when all of the kids and even adults were using Animal Crossing. Because Animal Crossing also had the ability to do Amiibo with cards and figurines into that, and people were cloning all of the Amiibo stuff to have in Animal Crossing because that was their social outlet. Well, one of the case studies that we wanted to do was some of the implementation failures in the kyber crystals from Disney, but we couldn't because one of the authors of 617 was formerly employed by a company that might have sued him for writing that type of stuff.
Interesting.
That individual is no longer employed at said company.
Interesting.
But also it's the microcontroller that senses motion
Yes.
Right.
In the handle, in the hilt.
in the hilt.
Yep.
It senses when you like walk by it and stuff.
Yep.
And
Oh, definitely, because I think I've got one in my office right now that's a little low on battery.
yes,
So that if it's low on battery, it can
Makes
detect
weird
vibration.
noises.
It goes.
Yeah.
"Rrrr." So yeah, every time I walk into my office, one of the lightsabers makes noise right now.
right. And it also senses when the blade is inserted
Yep.
as well.
Inserted
Makes a
and
different. It makes a different noise based on.
Kuchink,
Yes.
kuchink.
Yes.
It also tells when
Okay,
the
Larry.
RFID is the kyber crystal is inserted.
Is
and removed.
inserted. It makes yet a different
Yep.
noise. Yes.
Yes, Josh.
Larry, how many lightsabers do you have?
Well, I own two personally. I own a third that is a display piece, not one of the nice fancy ones from Disney. And the kids both have one, so there are currently 5 lightsabers in my office.
Like this one is from HasCon. This one I have here. well, it has gone a few years ago, and this doesn't have all the fancy RFID stuff in it. Like you basically just turns on and off.
Yep. Makes a noise.
Makes
some
noise.
shock stuff.
Yeah.
Yep. I have Darth Vader, one of those. That was like the replica.
This is just the hilt, but it accepts the blades and
the blades from Disney.
I believe, yeah, because if you look at the receptacles inside there, because I bought it, this wasn't from Savvy's Workshop. This was from one of the other shops in Galaxy's Edge.
Okay. I don't know.
And it comes in the case, and this one does not accept a kyber crystal.
It does not.
But it has a similar microcontroller. Built
detects
into
motion
it
and
detects motion, but it's not currently working. I need to put some fresh batteries in it and get out the multimeter to see if the component, like if you take this off, there's contact leads you can put the multimeter on to see if it's getting power.
We already took it apart while you were in the bathroom.
Yeah, and then there's the ribbon cables, right, that connects it to where the blade goes in. And so my guess is either there's something wrong with the microcontroller or there's some leads or ribbon cables that have been damaged because it might have fallen off of my shelf.
Could just be loose.
Is my guess. No,
Are
this
you guys
was in my office. But
aware of level up lightsabers?
I've heard that before.
I've heard
those. Which ones are those now?
They're the ones that you can actually fence with.
Yes. These you cannot fence with because the blade, at least on the ones from Savvy's Workshop, is a plastic tube. There's some foam inside, and then there's a string of LED connected lights in there, and you can take it apart and service them.
And you can fence with them. They are relatively robust.
Okay. I wasn't sure how robust. I told my kids, don't be whacking them against things or each other.
Yeah.
You know.
But the level up lightsabers are actually like Lexam, I believe. I'm not sure. One of the very strong plastics.
Yep.
And you can go full force.
Yep. Yeah, the ones from Disney are relatively robust. I mean, we brought them to the karate studio. Yeah. And one of the second degree black belts has been studying sword forms for years. So dual sword form, I might add. So yeah, we here. Show us.
Nice.
Wow. You know Kung Fu.
Oh my God.
You mixed the genres. You crossed the streams.
Well,
so did you.
I mean, look, Lucas watched all those samurai films and went, what if I turn that into a lightsaber rather than a samurai sword?
Yep.
Yeah. Like, dude, that was totally his vision and inspiration.
Well, he crossed genres too. He's crossing old westerns with samurai movies.
He took westerns and samurai
and war
films
movies
and Dune.
And Dune, yeah.
And
Dune.
One of his set designers did a cheesy sci-fi film back in the day as well. And if you look at the sets on that film, was that the one where they are growing the plants in space and they have to destroy them? I forget the name of that film.
Is that Silent Running?
Nope.
Silent Running is the one where they're growing the plants in space and
maybe that is it. Okay, yeah, Silent Running. No, you're right.
With
you're
Bruce
right.
Dern, yeah.
Yes. The guy that did that directed that and did the set design was also the set designer for Star Wars.
Makes
and if you look at the sets, you're like,
no, they're very
wait, that kind of looks like
so if he'd had a lot more money.
Yes, exactly. It would look exactly like Star Wars. I mean, even the way the ships come in the beginning of Silent Running is the same way they come in Star Wars.
That's a classic movie.
So, things that are old or new again. I mean, we see that in cybersecurity all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's May the 4th. And I wanted to make sure we spent some time on.
That's an old movie too. That movie's. I should have brought my book. I've got the hackers.
That movie is amazing.
That movie is in the hacker book, I think.
Is it really?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
That's an amazing movie.
It is.
Really is.
It's a really cool movie.
There's a lot of cheesy sci-fi that I need to watch.
Yeah.
I call it cheesy sci-fi. I don't know. That's older 70s sci-fi.
Yeah.
Zardoz, your favorite movie.
I think that gives you an appreciation for Star Wars, because if you watch the other sci-fi like in the 70s around that time, it's like,
it was all dystopian too before Star Wars, which was a lot more upbeat. All those old movies like Logan's Run and all that stuff.
Logan's Run was the one I was confused with Silent Running.
Well, Logan's Run is a classic too, and it's a hacker movie really of sorts, and because they had those crystals in their hands, and his crystal gets reset to say that he's too old, and
they're gonna die, right? The crystal determines
when you turn 31.
You're gonna die.
You yell renew though. You don't yell carousel. You yell renew when everybody's going to carousel.
Right. Carousel's where you go.
Carousel's where you go to die.
When you float up in the air, and then when you get to that crystal, you just explode, and you're supposedly you're supposedly reborn in the hospital of the city. but obviously not. They're really just keeping population under control. But and then they want Logan to go undercover to catch the people that are running. And so the computer spins his crystal up so that instead of him being the age he is, it looks like he needs to go to carousel. It starts blinking. And so then he gets hooked into the underground, and he's trying to break out of the city.
That was a great movie too.
That's a great movie. Yeah.
Yes,
and a great book.
Yeah, a lot of that 70s
very
sci-fi
dystopian though. But then Star Wars came out in '77, and it was like a real different kind of feel to sci-fi.
Because I think part of Lucas's vision and part of the greatness of it was he wanted a space opera.
Yes.
And you get that, especially in certain scenes in Star Wars, man. Like, you get that. Like, when Luke is, the music's playing and he's overlooking the desert and the two suns. And that's like, it's a very opera-like kind of feel. And you didn't get that feel from other Silent Running, Logan's Run, those kind of movies. You didn't get that feel.
Dystopian and political, and he sort of pulled all that. I mean, there's obviously a political aspect to Star Wars, but he pulled that back and just went off in this more traditional movie, feel good, and it reached a lot more people.
Well, in a hero's journey is what he followed,
and so it suddenly reaches all these just average people who didn't really identify with sci-fi before that.
Agreed. And this is Science Fiction Weekly here, and
hey, I went and saw it in the theater when it came out, so.
I was born the year Star Wars came out, so
maybe you saw it in the theater. You just don't know.
Return of the Jedi, I definitely saw in the theater.
I saw it in the theater, and I was 3. It's the first movie I ever saw in the movie theater.
Huh. I actually, interesting enough, a sidebar. I waited in line a long time to see this. I was 14 years old. I waited in line with my little brother to see this. My dad dropped us off
to see A New Hope.
Yeah, and
you're 14 years older than me.
Yeah,
okay.
and during the movie, there was an electrical storm and the power went out. And we sat in the theater with the emergency lights for almost 2 hours till they turned the power back on. The manager kept coming in and going, "We're going to get the power back, and as soon as it comes back, we'll finish airing the movie." Because all these people were like, I think they were worried they were going to like burn the building down or something if they said, "Sorry, come back another time," because everybody had waited.
Here's a free movie ticket. Yeah,
everybody had waited a long time to see this, and it was a big deal.
Wow.
And but the power came back on. They started it back up and got it going again. So I ended up seeing probably the longest airing of A New Hope that was ever done, because the movie, the runtime ended up. My poor dad. We didn't have cell phones or anything. Right. My poor dad's sitting on the parking lot. He was supposed to pick us up, and like 4 hours later, like, "Oh, hi, Dad. Sorry about that. Yeah, the power went out, and we wanted to see the rest of the movie." And he's like, amazing. "Yeah, great. I think I just missed something important, but okay, you kids don't need college, right?"
You know what else is amazing is PyScript allows you to write Python inside of HTML tags and run it inside the browser. Is this a good idea? I don't know.
This one you could view source, right? And view the...
Well, because it's just like
this will never get abused.
View the source, literally.
It's because
this will never get abused by Tyler.
What?
Huh?
That's bad.
Oh, it's bad.
You think that's bad? Is that bad?
I think it's bad.
You can write your own modules for it as well, which I think is the
it would be fine if the code was good and you had, but I mean, yeah, you could view source and you could see all of it.
Tyler, you should really think about the upside. How much faster are your pen tests going to be?
How much worse can it be than JavaScript, though? I mean, you're writing JavaScript that runs inside the browser. Now you're writing Python that runs inside the browser. It's just got so much. I think that, but for me,
there's a barrier of entry for code writing.
Right, but also
not anymore.
I think it's the newness that scares us. Right, our fear, our FUD level is up there because it's new. Right, JavaScript, crappy or not or whatever, has been kind of tried and tested, and we've worked through some issues with JavaScript running inside the browser. Now we're going, you can run Python inside the browser. Oh, well, yeah, this has got to go through some iterations before we can even think about.
And I'm already seeing methods in here that say PyScript write and stuff like that. That's letting you write data directly into elements. And
but just like JavaScript, there needs to be an engine inside the browser.
But it's so much more powerful.
There's an engine inside the browser that's interpreting Python, just like it's interpreting JavaScript. And we all know that the issues with browsers largely stem from V8 inside of Chrome that's responsible for interpreting and running all the JavaScript. So I'm not sure how that is. Is there something like V8 inside the browser that you're loading to run?
I don't think so.
I didn't dig into it that
I would think you're just
much.
accessing that on the back end.
I was just looking at a couple of the examples. I mean, this just came out. It was announced at PyCon.
Yeah, I mean, it's all going to come down to how good the code is anyway, just like JavaScript or anything else. And I mean, anything.
But how good the interpreter is that's running inside the browser, and how good the sandboxing is in the memory management.
Sandboxing, what kind of permissions are like? Can you inject things to it? And all that. So in the end, it's just another scripting language that's going to be available on pages. And so just like any other scripting language on a page, it's going to have the same problems and pluses. So,
right.
I mean, of course, it's version 1 is going to be so secure.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's the thing. I think we're just getting a handle on like some JavaScript security and some rule-based access and sandbox control around JavaScript. And even that we're not doing a great job at. This, we're not going to even be able.
You were here for the source defense interview, Tyler, right? Like, they seem like they're doing that's some really cool tech. I mean, they're a sponsor of the show, but like that's some really cool technology to allow developers to have even finer grain controls and security controls around the JavaScript that they're incorporating inside their web application, which is running inside your browser, right? We didn't have that 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So it'd be easy, I think, interesting for them to adopt, if this starts to take off, for companies like Source Defense to adopt that, for browsers to be able to put more security controls around. Okay, it's not just JavaScript running inside the browser. Now there's Python. I mean, it's literally py-script is the HTML tag, and you write Python right inside of your HTML.
So a lot like PHP or something else. So, I mean, it just...
Well, except PHP is on the server side,
well,
which is why
true.
You can't right-click on the page and view source.
That's true. So, I mean, obviously there's a potential for a lot of
abuse. If you could
abuse.
find that episode, Larry, that would be amazing.
Amazing. Yes.
It was definitely in my house at the pool table.
Yep, it was.
Mm-hmm. I remember those episodes.
Yes.
Damn.
Back in the day, I didn't even know where you guys were located.
It was a step up from my old house, where it was around this little rickety bar.
I've seen those too. Yeah, I've seen those old episodes. I don't think I watched them, like binge watched them or something.
Those stools sucked, by the way. I'm so glad I was younger when we were sitting on those things.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing worse is the chair Doug's sitting in today,
which I think is made of the old stool that you had.
Yep, I wouldn't be surprised.
And cushions from couches that we vintage sourced from the 1940s.
Smells like Teen Spirit.
They have that post World War II smell to them, don't they?
Yeah, that's just kind of like asbestos-y chemical smell.
Speaking of asbestos-y chemical smell, David Walden, the computer scientist, is dead at 79.
I couldn't find a good article. I'm glad you brought this up, Larry. Did you add it to your stories?
I did. I found the New York Times one, which is behind a paywall.
That's what I found too. That seems to be the best reference to it.
There's a couple of other ones that
not as good.
That like they've been distilled from that, and like one of them that I just read was in really bad English. So
the New York Times one, does it give me the paywall? And like, if I open up in Brave, does it give me the paywall too? Yep.
Incognito or mobile browser with...
Don't tell them about the incognito window, Tyler. That's our secret.
I can give you the story if you want it. I mean, I have it behind the paywall. So.
Oh, even incognito mode, it's asking me to register, which is weird.
Doug has it.
Doug has it. You have a New York Times subscription, apparently.
I do.
You pay them $1 a month, huh?
I don't know what I pay them. I've had a subscription to the New York Times since I was in high school. So.
He's also one of those people that has a subscription to the New Yorker but doesn't read it.
I do read it.
You leave it on your coffee table so you look like
I don't get the text stuff anymore. I was early on. I was like, please quit sending me all this stuff. I'll just read it online. I don't want a bunch of paper.
So what does it say? Who is David Walton?
He was the person that built the backbone of the internet a long time ago. He was part of ARPANET stuff. That
was he a BBN engineer or was he part of DARPA?
Oh wait, yes, it was BBN.
ARPA at the time contracted out the initial build out for the internet to Boston-based company called BBN.
IMP.
Yep.
Yes.
He built
Imperators.
That was the like original switching. That was the switching algorithm that allowed you to send things to a lot of different outputs.
Now his name, it has to be one of the folks mentioned in Where Wizards Stay Up Late. a book about the original engineers
sure.
that built the internet. Has to be. Yes. I wonder if he's the one that flew to, was it Stanford, where he flew out there to oversee the unloading of the first IMP router that was going to stand up some of the first connections for the basically first connections that built the internet.
Yeah, so he worked for BBN, otherwise known as Bolt, Beranek, and Newman in 1967.
He worked at Lincoln Lab too, right?
Yes, he did.
At MIT, yeah.
Yep.
So that
Well,
was
those first BBN engineers were all
that was for that, yeah,
mostly MIT people. That
and he was a bridge player. I know that because when I was in college, all the computer science people played bridge.
Interesting.
And he was a big-time bridge player.
My grandmother, I never played bridge. My grandmother used to play bridge all the time.
I played bridge.
Yeah, I used to play bridge all the time.
That'd be amazing. We all get here in the studio and smoke cigars and
I was
play
a
bridge.
punk rock bridge player. I got kicked out of some bridge clubs and stuff like that.
But for what? For what?
Tyler and I don't. Tyler and I don't do bridge.
I
We just
got
do
kicked
planks.
out of a
He
bridge
didn't.
club because I used a strong club bidding technique instead of Goran bidding technique, and the people said it was unfair. And I said they said you should have to teach us your bidding technique, and I said you should have to teach me yours. And she said, well, I'm the manager of the club.
That might be the nerdiest thing you've said to me in a long time.
I think
so
that's
proud.
ever. I was going for didn't lift his finger, his pinky off the teacup when he went.
Well, it was an
Freaking
old lady that was doing this, but she was like, you can't use that. And I was like, why can't we use that? And she was just like, well, unless everybody at the table knows the bidding technique, you can't pick one. And I was like, well, I don't know Goran. I only know strong club. And she was like,
how old were you sitting with a bunch of old ladies when you were playing bridge?
I was like 25.
9.
That's what you did for you know what? This is a whole different podcast.
Oh man, story time with Doug.
This is a whole different podcast.
So, Doug, lay back on the couch and tell us about your mother.
Yeah.
Tell us about that
She
time
did
you
not
played
play bridge,
anyway.
but she was in a lot of women's clubs.
This is just going to be the show of tangents. This is just a
Yes.
very
I think so.
tangent-
It already
this
is the show
a
of tangents, yeah.
A very tangent-heavy show.
They got the gin out and it just went off the rails.
Went off the. Are you drinking? You're drinking Scotch and gin.
Yeah.
One bourbon, one Scotch, one
There you
gin.
go.
There you go.
One bourbon, one Scotch, one gin.
I don't think we have actual bourbon. We have Irish whiskey. It's close. Yeah.
I'll cut them all together.
Doug just mixes everything at the bar in his glass and downs it. That's what real men drink, he says.
I used to go to this bar and they had one of those igloo coolers.
Is this another tangent?
Probably. It's related to alcohol though, so at least it's here.
Is it related to
They had
DS?
an igloo cooler and it said grog on the side of it. And for 25 cents you could fill a beer mug with it. And what it was they dumped all the used glasses in it.
Yes.
And
I've heard of that at bars.
People would drink it.
Have you drank?
I've taken a shot of it before.
Because it gets towards the end of the night, and you're like,
it was pretty
If I
grim.
haven't died by now, this isn't gonna kill me.
My roommate would drink it, and I've seen him drink shots of Aqua Velva before. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. So
It may not be Miller time, but it sure is vanilla time.
Draco and Noir on the rocks.
Unpatched DNS-related vulnerability affects a wide range of IoT devices.
It's never
we go.
DNS.
Until it is DNS. And this time it's DNS in uClibc, which is awesome. I mean, I certainly love this story for the fact that it's uClibc, which is, it's like libc, but it's dumb. I don't want to say dumbed down. That's the wrong word. It's streamlined.
micro. It's
Streamlined.
Micro.
Streamlined for embedded devices. Optimized, which means they've removed all of the security.
Yeah.
Because that's just overhead. So that it runs great on embedded devices.
You got to get it
that's,
small. Yeah,
that's
so-
like BusyBox or,
Yeah,
a lot
what's
of
the
other
first thing
things.
to go? Take the security out.
Take the security out.
And all those passwords, it's just so complicated.
memory protections. Pff, what is that? That's
that.
You know what that is? That's overhead.
Network overhead even.
Also, things like randomizing port numbers and randomizing transaction IDs.
That's overhead.
Randomization is overhead, dude.
I mean, do you know how much processor
that was
power
it. That was actually, it was in combination, the way I read this, the combination of an uninitialized variable leading to the transaction ID always being incremented by 1. So there was like another variable that was set to 1, and there was something uninitialized, which basically means that predictably the source port was always 53, and the transaction ID was always incremented by 1.
That I was just going to say.
Allowing you
what's,
to predict.
You know what's random? 1. You know what's random after that? 2.
Mm.
And the number after that's random?
But that just goes back to what I call an engineering problem, which is if you're a developer, your job was to make it work, and logic and security are not necessarily the same two things, because logic says, well, if I'm going to increment by one. I'm going to do some random crap. It's just more coding.
But I don't think it was intentional, Doug.
No, I don't think it was necessarily intentional.
If you look through the step through of the code,
yeah,
like to me it was just a coding mistake. Like they hadn't looked at the code and the logic flow in that way to go, wait, that's a problem.
But it
and
worked.
since it worked, it passed QA.
Yeah.
Like it works. Like this
what was the
working
criteria?
great.
Does it work?
Works.
Yes.
It doesn't crash.
DNS
and
works.
It's performant. It is performant because you're not randomizing anything, so you get
We never looked at code for like security. It was always just written, does it work?
But not even security. It's a logic flaw whose the unintended consequence is that it is a security related flaw. But like finding those logic bugs, as all of us know that have written any kinds of code, you don't fix it unless it affects the user in some functional way. This code was functional. Just happens your logic flaw in this example made a security
and that was a pre-modern development approach that, I mean, today companies release beta all the time and they let the end users debug it. That was exactly what we were doing. We tried to work all the major complexity out, but then there's always going to be logic flaws and other issues that pop up, and when they do, we had a procedure for fixing them, just like you do today. But some of those could be awful security holes now, and code has this.
I'm always like, they're like, you need to put it in QA. I'm like, releasing it in production and letting the users test it? Isn't that QA? That's QA, right?
QA has 2 people staffing it, and they're being told this all has to go out on Friday, and if it doesn't, somebody's getting fired.
And here's your scripts.
And they're like...
back in the day, it was literally, I mean, it might have been digital, but it was also, we did a lot of printing out, 20 plus years ago. It was QA, here is your test guide. So when we make a new release, you're to go to this document and go, okay, test 1 is I go to this place and I click here, I go to this place and I type this command and I do this and I do this, and this is the result I should see. And if I don't see that result, then I need to go file a ticket.
And you know who wrote the testing document?
It was the developers that wrote the testing documents.
Yes, it was usually me. I wrote the testing document, I wrote the code.
Wrote the testing documents for the QA
and
department.
Took them down there and they went, okay, we added 23 to 16 and we got 39. Yes, it passed.
Right.
Now, that didn't mean it always worked, but it worked for all the cases that we came up with, which were the common use cases. But then a weird use case would come in. For instance, one of the piece of code we had one time that caused a horrible crash that would have been a security problem in the modern age was a leading 0.
But the best QA people were the ones that tested the script, but also said, like, what if I put some junk in that field? What if I click here instead of there?
And if they had time,
they would modify some of those testing processes.
Like they would have caught that leading 0 problem in that piece of code.
And you know what they did if you were a really good QA engineer, Doug?
Fire you.
Nope, what would you get promoted to? A developer.
Well, that was an aspiration of the QA people.
That's where you started. When I started my first company,
they didn't have the right degree.
They were like, okay, that's fine. You can write some code. Like you showed in your interview, Paul, like you can write some code up on the whiteboard and write programs. But you're starting in QA because you got to understand how the system works. You got to understand the application, the flow, and all that stuff. And once you can QA it, then you can start writing code for it.
Yeah. But a lot of this stuff's pulled out of old code too. So this DNS stuff is getting yanked out of old stuff that was already there. And
I'm not sure how far back, excuse me, this uClibc thing actually goes. It was
a while, I think.
Was this the Nozomi Networks one that they found?
God.
Yeah.
I've heard of it for quite a while.
Nozomi Networks.
Nozomi or Xiaomi?
Nozomi. 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 Nozomi.
Nozomi.
Are the ones that found this one. And I encourage our readers that when you click on the article, you find the one little word that's highlighted as an HTML link that goes to the Nozomi Networks website that steps through all the packet captures and the code, because that's where the fun stuff is. It doesn't. I don't know how far back these versions go. Well, I mean, it says the version. I'm not sure how old it is. uClibc 0.9.33.2. Yeah. Anyway.
Anyways,
But I mean, they highlight the code. It's great. It's a great read.
And you know the DNS haiku, right? It's not DNS. There's no way it's DNS. It was DNS.
It is DNS.
Yeah. Speaking of DNS, Paul, I need some more ice. Can you hand that ice cube tray over?
Yeah, I need a drink.
I can resolve that issue for you, Larry.
How about
I see what you did there.
Filthy botnet?
Wow. What about a filthy botnet, Tyler?
What about your filthy botnet? Does your filthy botnet use dirty cow or something?
I haven't put a piece of filthy ice in my filthy glass.
Yeah, for your filthy botnet.
Yeah, I'll sterilize it with some gin. Let Paul
go Tyler.
Fairly relevant to you, Larry and Paul. The what is it? UNC 3524. They have a botnet that's went undetected for about 18 months.
Oh, that one was interesting. My story number 16, Tyler. This was Mandiant that found this one, right?
Yeah, Mandiant calls them the back door anyway. QUIETEXIT.
QUIETEXIT.
So they're UNC path or a UNC actor, but super stealthy. Does some interesting stuff. It lives on IoT devices, load balancers, wireless access point controllers. Leverages kind of some techniques that I would consider, our default TTPs, but very stealthy from that standpoint. No, there's no AV, no EDR on a lot of these. They're leveraging those and a lot of the built-in tools to establish their initial access and build like SOX. It's essentially a SOX proxy or reverse SOX proxy tunnel back into the victim's network in order to do things like instead of going after Active Directly directly, they're using things like EWS to establish and query O365 tenancies and get mailboxes. So, Paul, think of our business email compromise stuff. Just living on the IoT box, watching emails of the executives looking for financial transactions, mergers and acquisitions, but all leveraging kind of live off the land through WMI stuff, but through the IoT devices, whichever one they're leveraging.
It's interesting, Tyler. I gave a series of talks about 10 years ago, one of them being at BrewCon, and I theorized, because it was very much a concern of mine of things that kept me up at night, still do keep me up at night, and now here we are living that today in this article. And I said, look, and everyone, I don't know if everyone thought I was crazy, but everyone kind of dismissed it because there were so many other issues. And I said, look, if an attacker wants to be really stealthy, they're going to go after an embedded system, a network appliance, or an IoT device, however you want to say it, because of some factors. Let me think about what those factors were. For me, one, there's no mouse and keyboard and monitor on these.
No HMI
on these
human-to-machine
interface on these devices. That means, like, when I do stuff, there's not a user sitting behind it going, wait, my machine's running slow, something's popping up, why is that command window come up for 20 seconds and then go away kind of thing, right? The second thing is, as this article also points out, there's no anti-malware, to use the most encompassing term, endpoint security, available on these devices. Like, there's nothing that goes, oh, you're trying to do XYZ in memory DLL injection, and therefore that's bad, and I'm going to alert someone that that's there. Whether someone sees it or not, as we know, is a different thing. But on these particular systems, there's typically not anything like that. And that's not 100% true, but for the most part, these systems are not protected in that way, because they run, I mean, they may run Linux, but they might run the 12 different processor architectures of MIPS and the 10 or so architectures of ARM, or however many there are, and therefore that's not supported, right? And they also run a lot of these devices standard Linux operating systems, where it's fairly easy. I mean, with a little bit of work, you can get your software to run on these devices and do some stuff. They're not often monitored in the same way. They don't often log. I mean, if they do log, no one pays attention to the log. No one takes the time to go.
Yeah, the monitoring thing, like, we've got it down. Like, hey, all of a sudden my domain controller is talking to China. It's never talked to China before,
right?
But my IoT device is talking to China. Let's probably do an update.
Right.
Add two more pieces to that. One, you've got a device that may or may not sit on an external boundary, maybe a DMZ, maybe it has a dual NIC. Two, it has large swaths of visibility into multiple networks. If you're using segmentation or tiering, those are usually connected and have, a spanning port or multiple ingresses with multiple VLANs on there.
Yep, trunk port at least.
And additionally, the logging, even if they are doing good logging, and they see the traffic hitting the domain controller going through it, this is a device that is typically routing, and so they're looking, when they're doing IR or investigation threat hunting, they're looking at the two endpoints. They're not looking at what handled that traffic as the pass-through. So, I mean, we've kind of seen this, and we were leveraging this, and there were nation states leveraging this back in early 2013.
Yep.
In just a different sense, where they were using IP tables, they were running in memory on these embedded devices because they could leverage them and route through them very quickly with unattribution. All of those things were of interest. Now the fact that they're living on them and actually utilizing them, like you said, many of us have been speculating about this for years. It's just here, but now we also take that one step further with things like UEFI and bootkits and firmware embedded malware. So, all right, so you do start to look at your traffic and worry about this, but if you're able to maintain persistence, run in memory, and start to live on firmware and chips, like you're adding an entirely new level of long-term interesting visibility into things like email, which they're after right now, that can become a very, very big problem for sensitive organizations. You think about this in any kind of government, or even a supply chain or a contractor, which there's another story about contractors. This is a pretty big deal.
Also, there's a living off the land component in these devices that's interesting. If they run Linux of any kind of flavor, or even VxWorks or some other kind of embedded or even real-time operating system, it's a pretty rich feature set. Even if you squish it down and prune it as much as you can, it's still a pretty rich feature set. Even if you've got BusyBox kind of squished down, if there's any kind of shell on there, my other article that talks about sysdig, talking about in-memory malware that's getting around read-only file systems, if you understand Linux, or even if you don't and you research it, you can find ways to do stuff. It took me a couple of Google searches and a little bit of testing to create a fully functioning backdoor that just uses bash and dev TCP to create a reverse shell. And that's totally just all you need is bash, and make sure you get dev TCP there, and you're
all you need is bash.
All you need is bash, man. Right? So these devices are rich targets with rich feature sets that are largely unmonitored. So why wouldn't attackers go after them?
Of course.
Well, some of this is not going to change, right? You got pseudo vulnerabilities and local privilege escalations that have been found in Linux kernels that these devices are probably not going to be. So,
yeah, and I mean, there is some skill involved there, but you could certainly, whether it's running on MIPS or ARM as an example. I mean, if it's x86, I mean, it's a field day. But you could take a lot of these more commodity, widely publicized vulnerabilities and associated exploits and payloads and adopt them to MIPS or ARM. I think for a lot of times, people are like, why would people go through the trouble? For all the reasons we just mentioned. It's unmonitored and you got a rich feature set. So
why wouldn't they go to all the trouble?
Yeah, and it's not that much.
And it's the realm of all the attackers in the first place. I mean it's the whole Unix world is where everybody sits to start with. So it's where you want to be.
But also to Tyler's point on persistence, this was my other concern with IoT devices that I expressed in those talks that stemmed off of research that Larry and I started in 2006, probably to write the book in 2007, was that Larry and I both said this, and we cautioned everyone in 2007. We started in 2007 and said, look,
you were warned.
If an attacker can gain control of the firmware, if there are no checks and balances for what can be installed inside the firmware, potentially
game over.
In most cases, it's game over, as Josh said. You've got potentially control. I mean, if you can flash firmware, in a lot of those systems, you've got control. We were talking about this before the show. You've got control of the bootloader. You got control of the kernel. You've got control of userland, and you have control of the file system. You can embed yourself inside of that firmware And it doesn't matter how many times they reboot it, how many times they
Reload it,
wipe it and flash it. There's also ways to hide there as well. I mean, they could reflash it and wipe out your firmware, right? Certainly. And that all is device dependent.
Well, actually, some of these devices, Paul, I'm going to throw this out there. Some of these devices are double backup. In other words, there's the running configuration in memory.
Yep.
There's the firmware in offline storage or nearline storage, which when you reboot it reloads from, right?
Yep.
Yes.
And then a lot of these devices are I'm mangling the language, but you get the idea. And then a lot of devices, especially the ones designed for very low maintenance, have a second firmware, basically for manufacturer. If everybody screws everything up, you can hold things for 15 seconds or whatever, and it'll boot back to the emergency firmware type of thing.
Typically,
Default
typically the settings for that are stored in NVRAM.
Yep.
So even though you reflash the firmware, it reads the defaults from NVRAM. And as an attacker, if you can write new values to NVRAM, you can do things like, oh, I'm going to listen for a new firmware on TFTP for 30 seconds from this IP address every time that I boot. And that setting's in NVRAM. Doesn't matter how many times the user is going, I'm wiping the device, I'm reflashing new firmware over. It doesn't matter. Inside the bootloader is reading from NVRAM, reading those defaults to configure those. Yep.
If you can get in there, it is you win. What's the right word? The creative bricking of the device to your win.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they have to brick the device to get you out, and at that point, it's just buy a new one.
And UFI is an interesting beast. As I read more about it, I'm like,
all 2,500 pages.
All 2,500 pages.
And a bottle of gin.
It's an operating system that's using firmware. It's not firmware. It's a different. Tyler's. It's awesome stuff. It's really, and it's scary.
It's
too,
awesomely terrifying.
How attackers are bypassing secure boot. How we were talking about the spy flash and the spy bus and manipulations in that.
For the record, not SPY. It's SPI. Serial Peripheral Interface.
Serial Peripheral Interface is the bus protocol.
Yes.
But also they call it spy flash, which can be the flash chips that they're storing.
Correct.
Data on for that process as well. And I'm looking for resources to like can I get like some diagrams of like how all this stuff comes?
Let me draw you some charts.
Oh man, because there's a lot of acronyms, and some of the acronyms like SPI are overloaded. So when I go last week, I was reading the ESETS research, and I really had to kind of unpack all of these different acronyms.
And SPI, you have to understand what SMI is, what the SMM is actually doing with inside the SMM. So you got some chip design and architecture coordination of how pins and sub processes and instruction sets get passed between chips.
Right, and then there's the EFI partition, which is also referenced as ESP. That's the
EFS.
EFS is the extensible file system. And
yes.
EFI is, you can create an EFI partition, which is a partition type, which is a partition that's fat. I think we just established 12, 16,
12
or
maybe,
32
and
that can hold those values, or that can be installed on a flash chip. Like, it is such awesome stuff. It's awesome stuff.
So two quick ones. The first quick one.
That's what she said.
Doing work in the IoT space. I think I want to call something out good that SPI has some connectivity names for which direction in which data is traveling.
Yes.
MOSI and
What do you mean?
MOSI and MISO.
Really?
Yep. And that's an abbreviation. And I love the fact that the electronics industry is realizing that some of the names that were selected for some of these protocols back in the 60s and 70s are now no longer applicable. Master out, slave in, and slave in, master out.
Yeah, they're trying to change some of that.
SPI is one of those that they've readily adapted some new names for main in, subordinate out type of thing.
Sure,
main in, serial out. So,
it's also similar to CAN bus.
Yep.
Like some of the articles I read were comparing the SPI protocol to CAN bus and talking about some of the differences between similarities and differences between the two.
Understood.
Yeah, JTAG, SPI, IC2, like all of those have a lot of similarities. You got chains.
But JTAG is for more diagnostics, whereas SPI is for more operational.
Yep, I would agree.
From what I understand.
Yeah. So back to the article. Tyler, my question is, any idea what the initial vector for some of these for QUIETEXIT was?
I don't know.
What's your vector, Victor?
Number 10 in Paul's article, we got critical flaws in millions of Aruba and Avaya switches. Probably not connected, maybe connected. I don't know.
Yeah, not much detail. The Armis was so Armis posted TL Storm, the first iteration, which were vulnerabilities in Schneider Electric APC Smart UPS products that we covered a while ago. Their newer ones that are kind of building upon that are 5 new CVEs that are affecting Aruba and Extreme Networks. So Extreme Networks bought Avaya. Is that the? Those used to be separate.
Bought Avaya?
Extreme bought Avaya. Yeah.
Those used to be separate
purple
companies.
people bought
the
Avaya?
Purple people. It was the
purple people bought the light blue people.
Coolest looking freaking switches on the planet.
Yeah.
We did a pilot of those, and we had like switches come in, and they built the Extreme. I'm like, can we go with that one because that's the coolest looking one? And then we had
it looks like a kindergarten.
But then we had it matched almost the really cool looking refrigerator thing. That was, it wasn't Juniper. Juniper bought, what was the firewall? Net something. What was the firewall that Juniper bought?
Netscaler?
What is it?
Was it the Netscaler?
Yeah, I think it's
no.
Is that
no? It was
too new.
Oh man,
I don't know.
I used to administer these firewalls, and they had one that looked like really. It could be on the set of a sci-fi movie.
Lots of blinking
refrigerator.
lights. Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about. I can't think
Coupled
of
with
the name of it is.
yeah.
And then
Yeah,
you put some
that's me.
cubes on top of those.
Right.
You remember the cubes?
No, back to your point, Larry. Like, I think there's a couple. They don't have a ton of info,
NetScreen.
but
Sorry, it was NetScreen. Sorry, Tyler. It was. I
No,
had,
you're good,
I had
you're
to get
good.
that out. It was NetScreen made a firewall that looked like a refrigerator, and it was awesome. Anyway,
Oh
I think
God, I forgot those.
The initial vectors were around CISA's actively exploited lists that keep coming out and get updated, along with Exchange vulnerabilities. I think there's a lot of initial access between stolen creds, data dumps. They're getting that access, and then they're actually planting and pivoting from there. Like, hey, this is kind of a burner piece of access. It's really bad because they're hitting those IoT devices. Like, again, those are usually looked at like, hey, they hit that like from an incident response and I don't know, threat hunting standpoint. Like, that's usually looked at as a route, and hey, they stopped them, they're out, we don't see their traffic, they're not doing anything. So I think that's a lot of the initial vector we're going to see come out once they start to break this down a little more. But I mean, maybe some Aruba and Avaya switch 0 days, but some of the more government and heavier protected networks, I would 100% guess there's some O-Day. We've seen a whole bunch during the pandemic around VPNs. I think some of this access may have been some of that initially, and those VPN 0 days were burnt in order to gain that access. But just a theory.
and I wish I could find a picture of that NetScreen firewall from back in the day, and I don't remember what they called it, but I think that's worth the effort to dig that up, because they really, and I don't think they made a whole lot of them back in the day, but that sticks out in my mind. Yeah, I can't find a picture of it, but I was going to dump it in the chat. Anyway, if anyone finds it, please send it to me.
If anybody has one of those Cobalt cubes, wow.
What was a Cobalt Cube?
Cobalt Cube. It was a compact server appliance developed by Cobalt Networks, and then later purchased
Cobalt
by Sun
racks.
Microsystems. About 1998 to 2000 time frame. Yeah, they were pretty neat stuff. We use them as DNS servers at the university.
Almost like IRIX.
Yeah,
IRIX made some cool looking stuff too, in that same bluish purple color. Anyway, that's a trip down memory lane.
yeah.
LNK vulnerabilities or some LDAP relaying. I don't know.
LNK bomb. Is this actually a valid technique, Tyler, Larry?
Oh yeah.
Bill of materials? What?
No, so LNK links, like this is you think back. So you had CP link, right, which was used in Stuxnet. If that sounds familiar, that's
yeah, right.
8464. That CVE was leveraged to infect the jump drives and later to spread. So anytime essentially the LNK is an executable on Windows. It's a shortcut file, obviously. Yeah. But the vulnerability, there's a lot of details inside of the headers of these executable files or the shortcut files that allow you to do interesting things. There's subsequently been other CVEs, 2020 0729. That is Microsoft's latest version of the control panel link vulnerability, which is just the LNK link vulnerability. Anytime you browse to either a local directory or a file share, and there's an infected LNK file that has malicious code, that's shell code basically, and that allows you to execute things and or possibly bring up your shortcut, so you blend in. Anytime you browser, whether you're open it or do double click on it, it can infect and run that code based on how you're doing it. So this is
you're right, Todd. This goes back to Stuxnet, right? Like if there's a shortcut file, which everyone thinks is innocuous, but really isn't. When I browse to a share and it loads that shortcut file, there's like code execution and TCP IP communications that are happening in the background. Just by me as a user browsing to a file share, I'm basically either executing code and or initiating some type of TCP IP communications to whatever is embedded in that LNK file, right? Is a high level overview.
And there's a ton of like undocumented features. There's shellcode. There's header length. You can make them hidden files, make them system files, make them do interesting things. Add and remove capabilities and attributes. But this is leveraging a few of those, and this isn't anything new. This is exactly actually how most of the new ransomware kits have pivoted. In fact, we've seen several of the kits pivot to this, and they haven't gotten it right. They've obviously not been using this for a while, and we've seen some fails, and we've gotten some good TTPs and attribution out of this because they've failed.
Right, because inside that LNK file, the way I understood how link bomb works is an IP address that connects back to an attacker-controlled system that can leak NTLM v1 or v2 hashes back to me.
Tyler, we've been doing this for a long time.
This is a known technique.
Known technique. It just my understanding is this tool just makes it easier to create those LNK files that you put those in an unsecured file share. Somebody clicks on it from their machine, and
do they need to click on it or just load the share?
They need to click on it.
No. I thought they just need to load the share. Yeah, you just need to bring up the share in Windows Explorer.
You just have to call it.
Yeah, you go to whatever / server one,
right?
My files. There's an LNK file in there, Larry.
Effectively clicking on it.
All right. Well, because I'm reading the article and it says you don't have to bring up the share. After the file is created on the file share, it's then stored on the insecure file share, and when someone opens the file,
So that's for this particular tool because CVE the 07 so 2020 0729 is kind of patched. This is a non-fix issue because you're browsing to that share and you click the file, or you've infected a shortcut link that still goes to where it's supposed to go. You just add some variables to that.
Yep. Gotcha.
You can then have it relay the credentials in which that file was accessed back to your attacker machine. So it's looking for a file or a location that does not exist or does exist.
Or does exist with responder.
But Tyler, the user has to click on the link?
For this one, yes.
Okay.
And that is based on whether or not they're patched and actually how they're leveraging the LNK. So we're seeing a lot of attackers leverage an ISO file that self-extracts that has a Word doc that links to a shortcut file that gets dropped on the directory. So there's a macro or some Excel for making an execution call to open that LNK file and do the execution. So there's a lot of ways to do this. So you have, your mark of the web gets bypassed because you're using an ISO file.
Hold on, wait. So I can make the link look like an Excel worksheet that says employee salaries, which is going to entice people to click on it.
You can even have it open.
And that was my next question is, when I double click that link as a user, I can basically chain some commands behind that to go, leak my credentials back to the attacker, but then open.
Yep. So
the
you never
Excel
know what
worksheet,
happens.
So I never know what
it's
happens.
just added to the stream.
And this one's just simplifying a lot of that with Responder and using the drop file functions with either WMI or Python, and make some of this a little bit less cumbersome if you've not automated some of this pipeline.
Awesome. Well, not awesome if you're trying. How do you defend? How do you defend against this stuff other than applying the latest patches, which mitigates sounds like some of the issues?
So you're looking for some responders. So you obviously have good segmentation. You're not allowing broadcast traffic across things. Locking down open shares for write access. Obviously, if they have a user account and they've popped that, and they're not using like a Dropbox or something, that's a little bit more difficult. Disabling SMB v1, turning off some of the net BIOS will fix some of this. Watching for MDNS and blocking that traffic. Hardening your Windows firewall to ignore this from workstation to workstation. There's a few
all the things you should do, but not a lot of people do.
And it's stuff that you should do that's esoteric. It's hard to explain how to do all this and how extensive. When you get into this kind of segmentation and isolation, it does start to limit functionality, and that means people stop doing it. Because the minute they start trying to do some of the things Tyler just said, it means stuff stops working. And then people go back and they re-enable it because they go, I don't know, this isn't going to work. We're trying to open
something's broken.
They're trying to open in spreadsheets and they're not working, and now we got to re-enable this if you did it with a group policy object or whatever.
And some of this is very similar to like the curb relay up, which is kind of the next Windows story of big vulnerabilities.
Yeah, my story number 4 was a GitHub repository curb relay up. Explain what this does.
Yeah, so essentially you're able to make within inside of Active Directory by default, and in some very interesting misconfigurations, you'll see the everyone or authenticated users account allowed to add computers to the domain. That's some of that is standard based on which time frame you've stood up your domain, and if your force functionality level is at a certain level.
Because I don't want to talk to my help desk or IT department if I need to add a new computer to the domain. Therefore,
that's always been standard,
right? That's always been like regular users. Do you need credentials to add a computer to the domain?
So admin. Unless there's a misconfiguration, you have the old auth users or pre-2000 misconfigured from the early days. Then yes. It has to be authenticated users inside the domain. They can add. They cannot delete, which is a thing. But if you can add a computer to the domain, which is default configuration, you essentially are adding a computer to the domain. You're setting the password for that computer. You don't necessarily have to have a computer. You're just making an object in Active Directory, and you're modifying a few things so that you can get the KRB auth for LDAP to essentially request a TGT for that computer. So once you're able to do that, you can actually do that, create it, use the S for U self, and get the TGT. And because you know the password, you can actually relay that back to yourself and have a open system shell on the box you're in using that computer account authentication via the TGT that you just received. And so you've privilege escalated on the box you're on.
So, but you need valid domain credentials to do that attack.
Yeah. So any
valid domain credentials.
Yes. And once you're a system or a local administrator on that computer, you've obviously got a lot of advantageous things, Mimikatz, any memory running in credentials and privilege accounts there. If it's on a server or a domain controller, then that's even worse. It gets really bad based on how you do this. So yeah, and this is I believe this is a no fix by design. This is just how LDAP and how Active Directory functions. This is a no-fix local privilege escalation that's going to be around for a little while. So has some pretty big implications.
So the end result, this escalates you from a regular user on this computer to a system-level user on the computer.
Yeah,
through the domain. Local admin. Local admin, but through the domain to get to local admin, in other words?
Correct.
Yeah.
Because the computer is added to the domain, or the user account you're on is on the domain. Yes.
I gotcha.
And I think once it has that Kerberos ticket on board, it's considered a valid device.
A valid device.
So that's I mean that's the whole point of that part of the system, which is why they call it no fix, because that Kerberos authentication ticketing system, you just can't yank that out of there or turn it off, because then you could not couldn't validate anything on your whole system.
Right.
Yeah, it's bad.
It's bad. Yeah, that's a very
So SMB v1 really needs to die. LDAP signing and LDAP channel binding used to be considered pretty hard to get done. It's really not. We've written several great articles. I think one of our guys, Scott Blake, just released some excellent articles around this on Trimark's Hub. So there's content there. There's a bunch of great write-ups on how to do this. Also, account is sensitive and cannot be delegated. Like, you should have this for all of your admin accounts. Like, this is pretty much an easy win. It stops a lot of the delegation, the constrained delegation with protocol transition, constrained delegation, or unconstrained delegation. All of those things for those accounts get stopped if you simply checkmark that box for any of your admin accounts. So it cannot be relayed, and you essentially stop a good portion of the attacks you see around relaying. So there's some good guidance around there. Oh, also removing your authenticated users' ability to add computers to the domain.
Right.
There's Microsoft guidance around, changing the quota to, from 10. So I think there's a time limit, and you can add up to 10 computers to the domain, a certain time limit. They're saying to put it down to like 1 or 2 or something like that. I don't see how that really helps if I just use it.
Yeah, because you just need to add one computer to the domain.
Just one will do it.
Just one will do it. And you can remove that from authenticated user. In other words, you need to require a privileged level user to add a computer to the domain. Helps mitigate this attack.
Yeah, your server admins or your tier 1 or tier 2 accounts could be doing or should be doing that. Setting that to 0 and just having your domain admins administer that and do it is probably a better idea. That's who computers should be added by.
And it's just
but I feel like that's how we roll here. If I need a computer added to the domain, I have to take action as a user, but I think that's just to get the remote access software on there so that the real administrators can actually add it to the domain, right? Like, I can't add that to the domain.
There's some interesting monitoring too you can do around this for looking at localhost or 127.0.0.1, so that the service manager service that does the relaying, you can actually watch for a rule for or block the authentication for service manager to utilize Kerberos to the localhost address. Now, that probably has a good probability of breaking some other people's software based on how they decide that, but yeah.
Yeah, as a lot of those recommendations
Maybe
do.
in monitor mode is a good idea.
And that kind of segmentation that you're talking about is always difficult to implement when you have a lot of users and they're doing a lot of things, because then, again, you have to get approval and this person has to do it, and that's why people don't do it.
When you have 70 people versus 70,000
or 700
people,
and people are doing things, and it's like, oh, well, every time somebody does this, I have to get a domain admin to come in and approve it. And I mean, yeah, that's what you should be doing, but those are hard things to implement, and they take resources and time, and the help desk is going to light up when you put this in place. So
blocking stuff can be bad.
Always.
Which brings us to my story number 13. Every ISP in the U.S. has been ordered to block 3 pirate streaming services.
This one makes me laugh. I just want a T-shirt that just says, "But how?"
Thank you, Tyler. That was my comment on this. I'm like, but how are you gonna? You almost don't need to go to the ISP. You need to go to the DNS. Go to every DNS server.
DNS, yeah,
and block these DNS names. like, and just black hole the DNS. But like, how do you do that? How do you? I mean,
And then they just
you know,
changed
John
the
and I
name.
have talked about like
and they go
creating our own
Cloudflare.
DNS servers that go off the root, so I don't have to rely on anyone's DNS server.
Yeah.
I think this is a use case for doing that because like you could go to Google, like the most widely used DNS services on the internet, and go, you know what, black hole these DNS names, but that also doesn't prevent a user from just adding a static host entry. So
Yep.
now you're blocking by IP address, but then that IP address is like how, you're playing whack-a-mole. You're playing whack-a-mole to get these systems offline. But there's a whole case surrounding this. Was Israel.tv or
Israel.tv and SDA. I don't know how you say that.
what is on these sites? Israel.tv.
They were streaming
Israeli
like
dash-
movies and stuff that are copyrighted, you know, so they're just basically taking stuff, and it's just
There was like a reason for them to do this. Though Torrent Freak had the article that I linked to as well that gave a little more a better in-depth discussion on this whole thing, because the pirate sites were sued, but there was like a reason. Israel's most popular pirate streaming site with millions of visitors each month. Like, why are you picking on Israel? Like, seriously, like,
Don't mess with the IDF, bro.
it's like a small country too. Like, let them pirate stuff. Like, you're really gonna go to bat with Israel on pirating stuff? Like, really?
Yeah, good luck.
Probably gonna lose. Just saying.
Well, it says the infringing broadcasting included original content produced and owned by plaintiffs, mostly in Hebrew, but also from major studios in the United States and elsewhere. So it's just basically like every pirate site ever. I mean, people probably upload stuff to it, and you know they go grab things and stream it out.
They literally want to use it for like their means. Like, hey, we've got, you know, they want to go after a very specific site. They have now a court order that they can go and leverage, and they can get access to a server. Maybe they control. Like, there seems like there's some underlying things here that have been used to gain, you know, a unfettered access to do things later. This seems very interesting and very similar to some of the stuff that came out early
But
against
like
some of the
a legal question is, can the U.S. judicial system put a mandate? Is it a mandate or a law to say that every ISP has to block this specific thing?
It says the judge ordered domain registrars and registries to transfer the domain names to the plaintiffs. So they took the domain name.
They want to take the
and
domain
they said,
names.
okay, so is whatever it was, Israeli TV or whatever, is now pointing to the plaintiffs who can then.
Cool. So block them.
So they black hole it.
So block them. Now the plaintiffs can't use them.
But what if the domain registrar is outside the U.S.?
That's what I was wondering.
Right?
Well, then it probably won't work.
I mean, Pirate Bay existed for I don't know if Pirate Bay still exists
This
today, but
stuff
it
is-
existed for so long.
But the courts don't think about that. The courts just think
No.
about sovereignty, and they're still living in the 19th century. They don't understand that. I can just do this outside the U.S. or outside of who. You know, I'll move it to Yemen and put a DNS server there, and then it's just like
They're going to be very unpleasantly surprised by some of the new trends of and malware is going to start leveraging this. Like, mark my words, I've been looking at doing this myself. They're the unstoppable domains, which are backed by crypto, obviously on a blockchain, that are NFT minted, and so you're validated, verified, and you can put subdomains and back-end redirectors on that, but only you control that because of the block. And those are actually directed and pushed through for DNS, and you can't change that because it's cryptologically backed and NFT verified. And you can't take those down or take them over.
But they did.
But some
Sounds
domain,
like fucking
but
magic.
A domain registrar has to maintain the assignment and the pointer to the DNS servers. So how does blockchain, like, if I go to a domain registrar, I register a domain, I put some pointers, some DNS servers, how is that blocked by a blockchain?
They push it through a route. Because they have validation and verification, they won't take it down. They'll leverage their root chain in order to pass
the
the traffic.
blockchain will vote it out, just like
I
it does.
gotcha.
So the blockchain says this one does not have enough, it's invalid, and it votes it out of the blockchain. So it's still there, but it's no longer participatory in the whole
But
blockchain.
you once you own it and you mint it, no one else can
Right.
also over.
But they also, in this court order...
So even the domain registrar can't alter it.
Correct.
In other words, I got you.
They could, but then they get voted off the blockchain.
Okay.
The other thing they did here was they said financial institutions were ordered to not do business with those domains.
What?
They want to block
Wait,
the so some of the things I've read, they want to block the credit card companies, like because someone has to pay for.
Right. So now it gets harder because even if you find a way around all this,
you got to pay your domain registrar.
and well, you got to pay the domain registrar, but the people that want your content have to pay you. And if PayPal won't allow you to make payments to this location,
oh, this was a paid-for service.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so they're PayPal, banks, and other payment providers are not allowed to do business with these domains.
So you just use cryptocurrency.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always ways around it, but it's like basically, it's like you said, it's whack-a-mole. But they want to make it so that it gets harder and harder to get to the right hole, and therefore, that cuts down your business. And I'm not going there, but that cuts
That's also
down
what she said.
If you make something, and maybe to you, but if you make it so difficult to do business with certain things, it becomes untenable. I mean, even though it may still be there, it's just only a few people are going to be willing to figure this out.
Josh, you've been quiet.
On.
I missed your voice.
Well, I'm thinking when you say if you make business hard to work with XYZ service, right? It's very similar in sense to when you make doing business too hard. What do you get? You get shadow IT.
Well, yeah.
And so it's almost along the lines of if you make business too hard for people to do business with somebody they want to do business with, if those businesses become attractive for people, they'll figure a way out. Some clever bastard.
I think
what you're saying is I don't want people to pirate my content, and everyone has a credit card, but not as many people know how to use a crypto wallet. So therefore, I'm limiting my exposure.
But I can use a credit card, and I can go to PayPal, and I can buy cryptocurrency, and PayPal will hold that cryptocurrency in a wallet for me. Right. And then I can use that to pay for stuff.
But all these content holders are screwed once cryptocurrency really screwed when it comes to cryptocurrency.
But I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not saying this will stop it. I'm just saying this is how they move against these kind of operations. It doesn't end it, just like they don't stop drug and money laundering because they pass laws saying banks can't accept giant wheelbarrows full of cash without reporting it. People still launder money.
Yeah, they just bring in smaller wheelbarrows.
Exactly. I mean, there's always ways around it, but the more difficult
cannabis,
they make it, I don't know. I mean, I think the whole thing
they buy car washes.
Yeah. And they buy bars and restaurants.
Yeah, like Josh, you were
storage
going to say
lockers.
That was cannabis,
yeah,
right?
Cannabis has done business in cash for how many years now?
Yeah.
They're just starting to get access to banking. Just starting.
I mean, so this does drive it underground. It doesn't stop it, but maybe that assuages the plaintiffs to temporarily because they go, oh, well, at least they did something. Because I don't know what to do. I mean, it's like all pirated content. People have been selling videotapes. Remember those guys?
The mob has owned strip joints since the beginning of time.
Remember those guys used to go to theaters with video cameras and videotape the movie while it was airing? Mm-hmm. I knew somebody we were talking about A New Hope earlier. I knew somebody who did just that. Yep. They sat in a theater, they got people to sit all around them, and they sit there with a video camera, and they videotaped this movie, and they were selling the video cassette tapes of A New Hope for like $3. They were horrible quality with terrible sound.
And people standing up and coughing.
People standing up in front
exactly.
of them.
But it was like,
popcorn.
Okay, people bought it. But then, now it's a bootleg. It's not, I think they're just trying to push this to an underground level and say, we're not going to stop it, but we're not going to let it be legitimate either.
Right.
And there are people who would probably avoid this if they start going, I was going to watch this movie.
Which makes me think I want to watch the original Star Wars movies.
Well, you should.
And I haven't tried hard enough to get
What's
my hands.
the uncut director's edition?
No.
It's the one with all the nudity.
The pre-90s releases of
the
Star
original
Wars.
Release.
The original release.
The one where
they're somewhere. I just haven't looked
except for
them.
the Ewoks.
The one where Han shot first.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Except for the Ewoks.
No,
I don't like Ewoks.
Stop with the complaining about the
like
Ewoks.
Ewoks.
Ewoks are great. Stop.
I was rooting for the Empire the whole time. It's like, wipe them things out. Jesus.
Come on, dude. That was Seven Samurai. That's exactly what that was.
That was Seven Samurai.
That was Seven Samurai.
If those things were in your backyard, you'd be calling Big Blue Bug.
No, he was cute.
No, Tyler would be out there with his BB gun.
It's not called Big Blue Bug anymore.
And it's not a BB gun.
I mean, they were cute, but they also wanted to eat people as well, which is kind of...
Well, that part I liked. if they'd shown more of that, I would have been all for it. I was cheering for a Star Wars Cannibal Holocaust movie, but, I wrote Lucas. I was like, come on, dude. We need like a backstory on the Ewoks, lots of cannibalism.
Who were they going to eat? Like, come on now.
I don't know. Empire.
The most annoying character was C-3PO, but they couldn't eat him because he was a droid.
Because he was a god.
And he was a god to those people.
Jar Jar Binks thing, whatever it was.
They could have, if Jar Jar was...
Jar Jar?
Oh, we definitely could have had a good barbecue around
If they had Jar Jar Binks on a spit being turned over a fire, I'd be there. I watched that movie 5 times.
I'm sure fans have made that.
Problem is he tastes like fish. It's like red meat fish tasting. Like, no, it's
Misa
wrong.
not so tasty.
It's all wrong. And no, it doesn't taste like chicken.
No, Paul, but to bring the Jar Jar thing back.
Oh, God.
Oh, God. How did we get this again? Is the show...
You let me on here and everything goes to hell.
There's
no more Jar Jar.
There's the discussion that Jar Jar was pretty damn awesome.
The story. There's Lucas is quoted as saying it's all about Jar Jar.
But if you think about it,
think about how fucked up that is.
Jar Jar practices drunken style.
He does. Nope. And Lucas dropped a lot of acid, I think, to come up with Jar Jar.
I always figured Jar Jar was what he saw when he was dropping acid. Like, oh, God, get me out of here, please. It's back. Yeah, you could very easily...
I mean, look at what Jar Jar is. Jar Jar is a Tusken Raider that melted.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Mind equals blown.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of mind equals blown, RFC 9116. Did you see this?
9116. I'm not familiar with 9116.
9116 is a file format to aid in security vulnerability disclosure. You remember robots.txt?
Mm-hmm.
It's effectively the same thing that you put on a web server in the .well-known files directory. And the security.txt has a bunch of comments in it about who you can contact for reporting security issues. The files can be signed. They can reference PGP keys for use for doing the disclosures and so forth.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, that's awfully convenient.
Yeah.
Almost sounds like somebody planned that.
I feel like many of us could have written this format.
Yeah. And someone finally did. And now it's an RFC.
Wow.
Security.txt.
That's a great idea.
Yep.
Why doesn't everyone have a security.txt? Yeah, why isn't it?
Well, because the RFC was only ratified, last month.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Was it?
This is not stupid.
Published April 2022.
So it's new.
This is not stupid at all.
No,
it's not. I mean, it's almost like that. Why didn't I think of that kind of thing?
Yeah.
It's definitely why didn't I think of that kind of thing. I mean, because it's not. Yeah, it's not that complicated, and it makes an awful lot of sense. So yeah,
I feel like it's not the first time someone's done this kind of.
Somebody was trying to do that.
Yeah,
they reference a bunch of other previous RFCs that are incomplete. Such as 2142 for the security at domain email address.
Yep.
Let's see, 3013, 2350, and 2196 and 7485 about contact information for various domain registries and so forth.
Yeah, I feel like abuse at the domain was proposed to be a standard as well when we're talking about copyright stuff.
Yep.
Those of us that spend time at universities know that.
Yeah. Security at was an RFC standard.
Yeah.
2142.
Shit, they even thought about compromised files. If an attacker compromises the website and can change the security.txt file. This is not
because you can sign it with a specific PGP key.
No, they also use the canonical field.
Yes.
And digitally sign it. I mean, this is not stupid.
No, this is nice.
This is nice, right?
This is very simple, very straightforward, very tiny. It's not a big lift at all.
No, heck, if you want to have the unsigned version, like this is simple. Start with your unsigned version and then move to the next one. It's a text file on your web server, for crying out loud.
I love this.
So who is who's used it? Like, I want to check if Casey Ellis and HackerOne are using this.
They should be the ones promoting it, Josh. I agree. It'd be a good start.
I think we should be the ones promoting it myself, but go.
Why?
What? Why not? You heard it here first, right?
Oh, okay, that's different. Yes, you heard it here first.
Yeah, I think
That works.
I think everybody should be promoting it. And like,
Fodil, and Y. Shafranovich.
Nice, Shafranovich.
Good job, guys or gals.
Yeah,
Or whatever,
we don't know.
whatever gender, whatever.
The two individuals from Nightwatch Cybersecurity.
Well, it's lists one from Nightwatch. I'm not sure if
maybe,
both of them
yeah.
are, but Nightwatch Cybersecurity.
Yep. Like, this is...
Good idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it.
Yes. Yakov. Edwin and Yakov.
Nice.
Their authors' addresses are at the bottom of the file.
Definitely check that out.
Uh-huh. Super smart. Super smart.
That's all those.
I'm tweeting at Bugcrowd, Casey Ellis, HackerOne, Katie Mo with this right now, going, I assume you all know this, but damn, seriously not stupid.
Mm-hmm.
The highest.
Yeah, where did you find this?
I don't even know.
I was like, I just read all the RFCs.
Something
memorizing the latest.
Something popped up somewhere, and it was really smart. And it wasn't a really great article. It was honestly, the article was crap.
Yeah,
and
I didn't even blink. I assumed he just reads the frigging RFCs, dude.
Right?
Well,
the path he's going down is one we've gone down.
Yeah.
So many times in the past, you read like a.
It
feels like a crappy article, but you see what they're linking to, and you're like, oh. You're trying to talk about this really smart thing, but you're not really that smart.
It was really crappy, and it was like a file format to aid in security vulnerability disclosure. I'm like, what kind of file? Like, is it a Word doc? Like, is it is it an ELF? Is it an ELF binary?
It's
I'm like,
template.
What the hell is this? And they referenced RFC 9116. So I went and looked up RFC 9116, which is it's a direct link to the RFC. I'm like, oh, so Josh, it did read the RFC. But I was pointed to the RFC by other sources.
It's not that you read all of them. It's just that, I got it.
All right, we've talked way too much about cybersecurity. We need to go back to Star Wars for a moment.
Okay.
I was at Universal Studios, and I think this was when we did the actual Universal Studios park, and we had we were going to do this entire park in 2.5, 3 hours.
Fuck.
Which it was later in the evening, which made it totally doable because I didn't have an easy. They call it an easy. I want to say it's an express pass. Express pass.
Yeah.
I didn't have one for this park, so we went there late, and we're standing there right outside. I think it was after we rode the Spider-Man ride, and these two very enthusiastic young gentlemen come up to me and I don't want. They weren't wasted in that kind of sense, but they were they were charged up, man. They were excited to be at the park, and they were they saw I had a Star Wars sling, satchel kind of thing, and they're like, "What's your favorite Star Wars movie?" And I was like, "Oh, so caught it totally off guard." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Empire Strikes Back," and they started cheering and high fiving, and they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "What are you guys doing?" Doing polls around people, and they're like, "Yeah." And then they ran off and went in to ask the next people. I was like, I admire your spirit, gentlemen. That was awesome. So, what's your favorite Star Wars movie, Larry?
I go back and forth between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. I really like them both. That said, the original, and I can't pick one because the original trilogy was so foundational to me as a sci-fi nerd growing up.
Except for Doug with the Ewoks, because he's in the I don't like the Ewoks camp.
Fuck Doug. I like the goddamn Ewoks, right? But no, so all three of those original movies were so foundational for me growing up and were such great memories. And all of the subsequent spin-offs between the toys and the original radio dramas, it's a really long answer. But the house I grew up in, my dad and my grandfather built with their own hands. And as part of that, my dad was an electrical engineer, and he built a radio that was a built-in with an amplifier and a tuner and all this stuff. And I grew up laying on the sofa listening to the original Star Wars radio dramas on the radio. When they were broadcast on the radio, on a radio that on an FM radio receiver that my dad built that was a piece of shit because it drifted. So as it got warmer over the time listening, the frequency would change, and I'd have to go, because I didn't know how to use it. So they'd have to come back and come over and retune the radio like every half an hour.
That's awesome.
15 minutes. And one of the few things that I got from my dad when he passed away
was that radio.
And I still have it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So
Doug, yub.
Yeah,
yub nub. Nub yub.
It's Empire. I mean, that's definitely my favorite Star Wars movie. I mean, I love the original trilogy. Like I said, I went and saw those in the theater. I thought they were iconic. I mean, I really enjoy. I mean, I like all three of those Ewoks, regardless.
The director of Empire, though, was Ivan Kirshner. Did I get that last name right? Ivan
Reitner.
Reitner. Thank you.
Ivan Reitner.
Ivan Reitner was the original director, and I think he was the one that really set that movie apart. When I researched it and watched the documentaries and stuff like that,
and I think he learned a lot from A New Hope. Yeah, and I mean, not to criticize. I mean, I love A New Hope, but I mean, it's obviously the first of a long series of things, and I think
I give Empire credit for being a sequel and being one of, if not the strongest sequel in.
But they really polished it up. I mean, it was when you saw it happening in real time. It was like A New Hope was sort of this movie, but then it grew up when they got into Empire and made it into a much more polished and sophisticated universe and story and everything else. And it really started to come together there, because when you just seen that one movie and there wasn't this whole 50 years of backstory going on that you have now, and you saw it completely in the void, it was an okay movie and I liked it, but then Empire really seemed to make it like coalesce.
I'm assuming you watched Empire in the theater.
Yeah,
you didn't
when it came out.
You didn't know the spoiler. You didn't.
I saw the day it came out.
Darth Vader was.
No, I mean I didn't know any of it because it literally was just released, and we went and saw it and waited in line a long time to get in to see it, and I really like it. I like Rogue One too. I mean, some people don't
Rogue One. Rogue One's
it's dark, and I love dark stuff, and I thought that one had a much more darker feel than.
The ending is.
Yeah, I mean, it has a much darker feel than all of the other Star Wars stuff, which has a much more positive kind of feel to it. And I really thought Rogue One. I really thought they were reaching into it then, and they're like saying, okay, this is like much more realistic than. Oh yeah, there's an exhaust port they neglected to shield.
Oh, they really dug into that, man, like in a great way.
Yeah, and so I really do like that movie a lot. I went and saw that at the theater too, and I was like, wow, this is different, and it had a much stronger resonation with me. But Empire is probably my favorite. So,
Josh,
go ahead, and then I got one for you.
I liked Rogue One. I liked Solo, but my favorite Star Wars movie is totally unrelated to the content. Well, not totally unrelated. It was actually episode 4, before it was A New Hope. I went when I was, I think, 6 or 7 years old with my dad, and I got to see the words flying overhead.
Yep.
And I got that with my dad. And my dad's still here. We're good. But, like, it was so cool. Like, it was so cool to be a kid and see. You got to remember, back then, science fiction movies were not common.
No.
So I got to see.
You know where he got the text flying across like that from, right? He didn't invent that.
Right. No, I forget.
Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
Flash Gordon. Thank you. But I got to see that movie with my dad and see the text flying. I felt overhead. It really did. I swear to God, it felt like it was overhead.
But also, didn't Lucas? He paid fines.
Because he didn't have the credits beforehand.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's one of those Star Wars nerd facts, right?
Was that
started
one
right
of
up.
the first movies that had Dolby too?
Yes, the sound.
I remember when I went to see that, and it. I mean, like we were talking about it earlier.
It's one of the other nerd things about Star Wars. That they created sound standards.
Yeah, and it was like the first movie I saw. I was going, "What in the hell?" Because it was loud.
And then that turned into THX.
Yeah,
LucasArts.
Exactly.
Yeah, LucasArts created all that. Yeah.
Yep.
And THX came from THX 1138,
right? Which was his movie.
Right,
when it was a college. It was
a film school project that Lucas did. Yeah.
I knew you had some, but I want to.
Serious nerd fact. Wait. Serious nerd trivia question. What movie calls out as an Easter egg Lucas's favorite number in German?
Ooh.
118.
Is it 21? It's not 2187, which was Leia's cell
No.
number, and also
It's 1138.
FN 2187 in Force Awakens.
It's 1138.
Because that's THX.
1138. That's his number.
Eins-
But
eins-
which
drei.
movie calls that out?
THX.
There's
what
a
was
lot
the-
of movies
What
that
was
call
the
that out.
number? What was the number in THX?
1138.
1138 was his. Okay, was his number? Yeah.
1138. Yeah.
There's a lot of movies
Das
that call it
Boot.
out. Das Boot.
Das Boot calls it out in German as they're walking across the quay, as they're walking across the dock. They
Oh.
call it out in German over the
I didn't know
loudspeakers.
Isn't that number on? Isn't it on Harrison Ford's license plate in American Graffiti too?
Yep.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah. Is
Because
it?
he directed
Okay.
American. He directed
No.
American.
Yep.
No.
Yes, he did.
Did he?
Yes, he
Lucas?
did.
Was it Lucas
It was
directed
Lucas.
American Graffiti? He did.
No,
yes.
he didn't.
Yeah, he did.
Yes, he did.
You sure?
Yes, positive.
We
Okay.
can go to the internet.
Tyler, what's your favorite Star Wars movie? He's never seen them.
He's like, yeah. What Star Wars?
Return of the Jedi.
Ooh.
You're wrong.
What's your favorite Star Wars movie, and why is it Return of the Jedi?
Yeah, American Graffiti was a 1973 American coming-of-age comedy drama film directed by George Lucas,
With Harrison
Okay.
Ford.
produced by Francis Ford Coppola.
Why did I think?
With Harrison Ford, who got severely injured in a car wreck.
Yes. And Ron, ironically enough, Ron Howard was in it.
Yep.
And what his daughter's name? His daughter directed some of the new Boba Fett series.
Oh, really? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
she's
Book of-
Really?
amazing. And she was in one of the Spider-Man movies. What's her?
Harrison Ford's name tag in Apocalypse Now says G. Lucas.
Nice.
Bryce Dallas Howard is Ron Howard's daughter, and what I think is amazing is she's done some work on The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett and frickin' knocked it out of the park. And she's also a very talented actress as well, and extremely beautiful as well. Like, doesn't hurt the eyes when she's on screen either, but like her work on Star Wars is like so awesome. Like, she gets it when it comes to Star Wars.
And what's the name of the club in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom at the beginning of the movie?
Right, because that was a Lucas did. Yeah.
Club Obi-Wan.
I was explaining also Star Wars nerd stuff. We went on the ET ride in Universal.
Uh-huh.
And I was explaining to my kids, I'm like, there's ties between Star Wars and ET. My kids like, get out. I'm like, yeah, there's a scene in ET that I call out where he sees
1.
Yoda, right? And I forget the exact scene, but ET recognizes Yoda in the original ET film. And then we fast forward, we get back, and my son's like, I want to watch the Force Awakens. I'm like, guys, watch this scene. I'm like, watch the character come up as BB-8 is going across the desert after the X-Wing is blown up in the first scenes in Force Awakens. I'm like, look, that's an ET-looking character. And they're like, mind's blown.
Episode 1, when they're in the Senate chambers with Amidala and Palpatine.
Yes,
If you
that's
look
the other
down
reference.
below, there's another
Yes.
one. Then one of the delegations is a bunch of ETs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So speaking of Star Wars
And Episode 1.
and our favorites, have you watched the Star Wars movies in machete order?
I'm sorry, what?
Machete.
order. Now, I'm curious how that
Okay, I'm an idiot. What is that?
So-
machete order has changed since we've got all these new Star Wars films.
I mean,
If
it's still the same.
Yeah.
But
leave out episode 1.
Yeah, Machete. Well, Machete Order was invented in 2012, so episode 1 was still relatively new.
Mm-hmm.
And the order is episode 4, A New Hope.
Oh, you know them by memory?
I've got them here.
Oh, okay.
You blew it, Larry.
Yeah, I know them by heart. Yeah, reading
I
them right off the
memorized
screen.
these in my spare time.
Machete Order is in story order as opposed to release order. So episode 4, A New Hope. Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And then episode 4, Return of the Jedi.
It's almost like a Darth Vader kind of arc.
And that's
that
it.
they built it. Yeah,
Those are
it's very
it.
much
That is it in the canon.
Yeah.
There's no episode 1. There's nothing else.
Mm-hmm. It's not bad. Yeah.
Who decided that?
Let's see.
Dong Slinger 69.
Rod Hilton in November 2011.
And why is it called machete order?
Because
Like
that's
machete?
Because that's the name
'Cause
he
they-
decided for.
Because they chop.
If you make stuff
Does
up, you
he
get
does
to
he name
it.
vulnerabilities in his spare time?
Well, let's put it this
All
way:
right,
to
hold on.
to quote him in the original article, I've dubbed this machete order in the off chance it catches on because I'm a vain asshole.
No.
I hope
Update.
they
Okay,
also
at least he's honest.
And-
At least he's honest.
Yep.
I have
I
one
wanna
more
hear-
Star
I wanna
Wars. Go ahead, Tyler.
I said I just want to hear it in Spanish accents. And the machete order.
I have
Yeah.
one more, before we get back to
Order.
cybersecurity for another maybe 10 or 15 minutes because we started this at roughly 7:15. But Wilro Hood. Does anyone know the Star Wars reference?
Will Rohood?
Wilro Hood is the character in Empire Strikes Back that is running in the background with
Oh, the fucking ice cream maker.
the fucking ice cream maker. He's running in the back with this really futuristic device, which is a Hamilton Beach ice cream maker. And at Star Wars conventions,
Yes.
people dress in orange jumpsuits and they get their Hamilton Beach ice cream makers and they run. They make a run around the conference and they go the running of Wilro.
And multiple
Hood.
of them. And in fact, those Hamilton
Yes.
Beach ice cream makers now, because they are so vintage,
They're like $100
They
or whatever.
carry,
Yeah.
they carry a premium on
Yeah,
eBay.
they do. They do. It's
Working
like,
or not.
that's one of the things I love about Star Wars is that we can like reference and do shit that revolves around this one extra that maybe had 15 seconds of screen time that we can tie back to a Hamilton Beach ice cream maker, dude.
And like
I just think that's the most awesome, nerdiest thing ever.
you think about all that set design and the futurism and what they refer to in the industry about decorating stuff as greeblies. Like there are so many of those things at least in the original trilogy that were just common everyday items that
Yes.
were modified, even just slightly.
Modified slightly.
Like Han Solo's blaster.
Yes. Absolutely. And in The Mandalorian, in some of the early
Harbor Freight
episodes, right?
flashlight.
He stores the something in what looks like the Hamilton Beach ice cream maker as kind of a throwback to like Favreau and Filoni. Like they get it, man. Like they get the Star Wars culture and make reference. And like you can see them if you watch some of the behind the scenes things. They kind of talk about like, should we reference like the holiday special? Like Lucas would have us murdered if we did that. Like they walk fine lines, but I think they've done an amazing job.
And I think the amazing thing that is interesting for me now moving forward is that we call back on so many things and it's so readily accessible. So there's this concept that I don't know if I introduced you before you went to called bounding. And it's cosplay, but you're not dressing up as an existing character. You're making up
your own characters. Yeah, dude. I
Yeah,
think that's just really cool. I agree.
And I follow some folks on Instagram and their big thing is, be able to do bounding while at the Disney parks in Mos Eisley, Batu and all that type of stuff. And they're referred to as Florida as Batu East and California as Batu West. And one of the things that one of the women does is that it's bounding, Star Wars bounding from Target. Like she goes to Target and she buys a bunch of stuff at Target off the rack and, maybe puts a staple here and a piece of tape here and even a Star Wars outfit. Like amazing.
There's at least one stormtrooper that has a pauldron that has a coffee cup ring on it, and so anybody that does that costume has to actually put a coffee cup ring on the pauldron.
It's amazing.
I mean, there's a Harbor Freight flashlight that you slap some black paint on, and now it's like a scanner tricorder type thing.
Oh, Josh, one of the stories I wanted to make sure that we covered was the Pentagon finds hundreds of cyber vulnerabilities among contractors. I know we're leaving Star Wars and very sad that we're diverging into actual cybersecurity
Speaking
stories.
of the Empire.
Contractors built the Death Star.
Yeah, exactly.
True.
Thermal exhaust ports and all.
Somebody's cousin got
So
that contract.
they contracted with HackerOne to create bug bounty programs for, it sounds like, contractors for the DoD. Like it seemed like they were surprised that they found vulnerabilities because they focused on small to medium cleared and non-cleared defense industrial-based companies with potential risk for critical infrastructure in the U.S. supply chain. Like, what did you expect these companies to be hyper secure and have really mature security programs? But in that vein, I think a great exercise to underscore that these companies are the ones that probably need some help. Josh, I mean, this is Josh. This is what you're working on, right?
No, absolutely. So, I mean, the problem is that for any named contractor, that's a prime or a subcontractor, they're supposed to be NIST 800-171 compliant, like right now. They're supposed to have been done that since 2018, since December 31st, 2018, I believe. And honestly, that's my personal belief. My personal thing is that I think that one single percentage, like a single digit of percentage, was actually compliant. So like 5% of the contractor, 7%. Most of them not even close. Now they have to sign off that they're actually compliant with 800-171. And in the future, hopefully in a year or two, they're going to have to be certified that they're compliant and that they have a bug bounty program, that they have, pen tests, that they have security measures, proper CI/CD pipelines, that, Tyler doesn't laugh at them as he walks by type of thing. Actually, I think that's in there specifically. But
it's subpart 35, actually. Yeah.
Sounds good. But
Title 69.
Yeah.
The problem is you've got the exact same problem there that you have anywhere, which is get the code out that runs. Is it secure? That's not in the fucking contract. Don't care.
It is now.
Well, it is starting to be now. The interim rule is that a contractor has to be 800-171 compliant and sign that they are. Like the CEO has to sign off that they are and put that in the system, the SPURS system, SPRS, supplier or something or other, forget. And so so that's like SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, where the CEO and CFO actually have to sign off, and they're liable. They're criminally liable if they're wrong. And this is the same idea. They're trying to make it.
SOX is for financial records.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But it's the same idea where somebody who's an officer of the company, you better sign and you're responsible, and we're going to hold you criminally liable if you screw up, okay? But then they literally, for a while there, they literally didn't know what the passing score was. So like they knew the total number of points you could get, but nobody knew what a passing score was for a little while. So it was a little confusing.
So we're going to see a big errors and omission go up for insurance for the CISOs now, and your personal liability insurance go up as a registered member on a board.
Yeah, but it's a great point from both of you, right? Like, if I'm the CEO and I'm signing off on a score, does that mean that like I recognize this score and I'm disclosing everything? And even if there's fallout, that you haven't defined what's passing, what's failing, and if there's fallout, I've like told you like either our security is on some level of being completely piss poor and non-existent to like the most super secure company in the world, or anywhere in between. It doesn't matter. Like, I've disclosed, here's where we're at, and you're still doing business with me, so I'm dissolving my responsibility, right? I mean, it's not about, like, it almost sounds like it's not about like what score I get. It's the fact that like I'm disclosing it. I'm of this security level. End of story.
So much more complex than that, because you've got the Safety Act, which says that if you use technology covered under the Safety Act, and it's an act of cyber warfare or cyber terrorism, your liability is capped. So what if you just bought all the technology that's registered under the Safety Act, and you can get it skewed that the incident was a cyber warfare attack? Does it mean your liability is capped even to the government? Nobody really knows.
What if it's not your fault? Like, what about in the terms of SBOM and supply chain? What if it's a transient? Like, what if I'm a contractor for the DoD? I do my due diligence, the software I produce, but I'm sourcing some hardware, maybe some software from someone else. Maybe, I mean, it could be multiple the transient dependencies go deep. Maybe that contractor has part, like they're producing part of the software, supplying it to me, but then the other part of their software is outsourced to somewhere else, and that software has been backdoored, and it makes its way into me, and then I supply that to the U.S. government. Like,
remember,
who's liable?
The executive orders have already been put out that every contractor supplying software to the U.S. government has to not only have SBOMs, but it also has to be zero trust software. So that shouldn't be able to happen. I mean, come on.
But what
don't
does
you think
mean,
that our
zero
contractors
trust
do it perfectly?
Software. Zero trust is a process, not a software product. No.
It's not a product. It's a way of building software. It is a way of building software products. You're absolutely correct. It's a process. It's a way of building authorization, authentication, and accountability, or counting, or whatever.
But I inherently I have to trust the components within my software and hardware in order for it to operate.
No, you don't.
No,
that's absolutely untrue. Look, can you take an operating system and determine that is a fully capable operating system, and still you know every possible output it can make? Yeah, when the NSA certifies an operating system, which they haven't done for a while, but when they do, they know every single thing that operating system can possibly do. I mean, do you know the reason that NASA still programs in Fortran? Because they know everything that sucker can do.
Yeah, no, I agree, because it gets really complicated when you talk about hardware that has various software and firmware components in it, and then you have the kernel, and then you have kernel drivers, and then you have what we kind of deem as the operating system, which includes the kernel and drivers, but also other software and then applications on top of that. So when you're saying you're certifying the operating system and our software, that's a lot of components underneath the hood that you and Josh is drinking right from the bottle as I say that. Well, this is actually very concerning for me as we talk about national security, to validate all of those components. As I dig into these various components, and that could be like, you're troubleshooting something or reading an article or understanding how things are put together. Like more and more, I'm like, it is so distributed. Even if you talk about commercial software, like how Microsoft validates what drivers are being loaded has changed over time. When you look at when I troubleshoot my Linux computer, like the core Linux operating system, or kernel, I should say, benefits from some great security. You get into the drivers, and that's when you start talking to your hardcore Linux people. Like, I've spoken to some people that are way smarter than this than I am. Not to say much, but like, that's when it gets dicey. And I'm like, wait, that matches my experience. Like, holy crap.
When you do a tech segment, the last tech segment you did, how many different sources did you go to find guides to build this, do that, code this, whatever, right? It was probably 5, 10, 20, 100.
Yeah, you're right. It's like on average 6 to 12 different resources.
Okay.
That
that's for a 1 hour tech segment on a show where you're doing one specific thing.
And it changes all the time. It's a moving target, too, because, it's like, about the time you get it all evaluated, this company gets sold to that company, and that company gets adopted by this company, and then that piece of software has a new driver added because that's changed to version 2.75.
It's not even that, man. Like, that library's changed.
That's what I mean.
That Ubuntu operating system has been upgraded, and the drivers that they've upgraded.
Crazy.
And then, like, I've got stories flagged that I'm still digging into when we talk about firmware, how Linux implements firmware. And there's been some interesting. One article is kind of wonky, but I'm kind of starting to dig into like how, like, I'm doing updates on my system. It's like, oh, you're updating Linux firmware. I'm like, hold on, what the fuck does that mean? What is in there? What does that mean? What does that? I don't. Is that? Are you taking the binary firmware for the devices? Is there open source firmware? What combination of each? And there's whole Linux. There's whole Linux distributions that use all open source components for all of the firmware and drivers. I'm like, whoa.
Purism and things like that,
Purism,
right?
Yeah, Purism's one of them, yeah.
Do you remember when Travis Goodspeed, I don't know if it's a while ago now, but he actually got Linux to run on a hard drive. I don't mean on the platters of the hard drive in a computer. I mean on the actual microprocessor of the hard drive.
The computer that is your hard drive.
Yeah. I'd be more impressed if he could have gotten Doom to run on it, but
No, that's usually
that's not a pregnancy test. It's a hard drive. Come on, get it right. So, sorry, I couldn't resist. I mean, the point is that the you have more capability in your smartwatch than the space shuttle had.
By far.
Okay. And so the amount of microprocessors that could be running firmware from God knows when, written by God knows who, with versions of, oh my God, are you joking?
That's a technical term.
Thank you. I love that you understand the terms of art.
Josh, to your point, I've read some of these articles recently, and I've literally done a Control F and looked for the word trust. How are you applying the word trust in the context when you're talking about all of this technology. And it's kind of frightening as a security person, and I implore everyone to do this, to look for that word trust. Because when you do, you dig right, you get right into the issue of, like, what do I trust? What should I trust? Why should I trust that? And how should I validate that trust model is really the crux of the issue here that we're talking about. And we can go all the way back to DoD contractors and supply chain, right? The crux of the issue is the what, when, where, how, who of the whole trust model.
And Paul, I love that the motion was very telling. You said when you go right into trust, you didn't use the finger, you went for the whole fist. There's some trust there.
Trust it, because man,
really
you'll
quick
get
question.
screwed.
Really quick question. Hands up anybody here on camera who is only using mechanical locks in their house.
Wait, dude.
No.
What
dude.
other kind of locks are there other than mechanical?
No, there's smart. There's locks.
Smart locks.
Smart locks.
Does anybody there in studio use a smart lock? Tyler, do you use a smart lock anywhere?
No.
No.
Mechanical locks, right? Really good ones too, I bet.
A smart lock in my lab or on the front door of my house?
Front door.
No.
Digital lock.
My hand's not going up.
Digital, yeah. I mean,
A digital lock without a keyway that is not smart. 100%.
smart would imply that there's...
Oh, that's different. That's different.
But you're talking about wireless technology versus not wireless technology.
Yeah.
Like Z-Wave or Zigbee built into the...
Or Wi-Fi or...
built into the
Yeah,
lock.
so Tyler, to your point, there's a digital lock on the front door of your house, but does it have wireless capability?
Not a chance.
It has buttons. It's a key button. It's a key. Am I correct?
Yeah. It's a digital key button. It's like the older school ones, but yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't have wireless technology. Nobody can hack it.
No microcontrollers other than the programming on the backside that is manual, and there is no keyway.
I have one lock that is wirelessly enabled, and I mean, to bypass that one, a swift kick could probably be.
It's not about the lock.
Not about the lock.
You throw a rock through the window next to the door, type of thing.
I also have lots of cameras pointing at that particular door as well as a safeguard and security lights, and I lock my gate outside that door. So like you're gonna either have to make a lot of noise jumping the fence and or cutting that lock. To get over that, and there's also.
But you've got multiple layers of security before they get to said
and also, I mean, the last safeguard is firearms as well. And I'm not saying I'm going to murder people that come into the house,
but there is such thing as castle doctrine.
But there's also like non-lethal forms.
You're not going to murder them. You're just going to stop the threat.
To stop the threat, right?
Tight beam microwave, yeah. Just fry their spleen; they'll go away.
Only you, Doug.
Well, I mean,
no, Larry would do it too.
There's intimidation. Deviant, I think, has had. He and I have had interesting conversations about, you chambering rubber rounds and non-lethal things kind of first in your weapon, and if that doesn't stop them, then like the next round that's automatically chambered is the more lethal kind of option. Like I like those options.
I mean, that was. When I was doing that, that was how my shotgun was chambered. Chambered was double-aught buckshot, slug, deer slug. Double-aught buckshot, deer slug. Because you get two shots that will hurt. They'll hurt. They'll do a deterrent. They'll be less lethal should, I
mean, there's they go through
drywall, maybe hits one of the kids tangentially. But by the third one, you're damn up close and personal, and that deer slug is going to take you out.
Larry, just to be clear,
rubber rounds as the first ones, and then
double-aught buckshot is roughly 9mm pellets. So you're firing 9mm at the same time. It is not less than lethal. Let's be clear.
I agreed, but it's less lethal than a deer slug.
Oh yeah, a 1-ounce deer slug will stop the heart of somebody wearing body armor, for God's sake.
Exactly.
I'm not going to come to any of your houses.
Flies.
The house I used to live in had no locks. Literally.
Well, I think we talk about it in the security context too. Like, cameras are a thing.
We didn't have. I mean, it was literally like
come to my house, Doug. I'm gonna look at my camera and go, "Oh, that's Doug."
When I bought the house, I was like, "Al, do you have keys for the doors?" He was like, "Nah. If anybody breaks in, call me. I'll know who it was." It's Rhode
Yeah.
Island, and the my neighbor's outboard motor got stolen, and they called Al, and he came over there with a ball bat and his son, and they went up to this guy's house and got the outboard motor back.
Nice.
Right.
It's New England justice.
Yep.
But it worked. It was like, okay, that's pretty effective.
But I think much like our cybersecurity, monitoring is a
Yep.
really valid,
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
a valid thing. Also, I think
defense in depth.
it's defense and
Monitoring and alerting.
Al
Yes.
and
Yes.
Eric with a ball bat is more effective than a lock.
But much like we monitor our organizations for things that seem out of place,
Yeah,
right?
That's baselining.
It's-
And if
it's-
you know
it
your
seems out of
network,
place.
it's hard, but if you know it really well, you'll see overt things. You may not see
Right.
subtle things, but
And
you'll see.
I like the neighborhood watch kind of analogy, and we do this in our neighborhood too. Like if things seem out of place, our neighbors know how to communicate, which incident response is very important, right?
Yeah.
Know how to communicate to go. Something's out of place.
Also, New
therefore,
England justice.
like notify people, and mostly like, hey, notify Paul because he's got like the most advanced cameras in the neighborhood. Like, what, Paul? What did you see, happening there, and what can you research to go? Is that legit or not? And also like talking to people too. And I think we do the same thing in incident response. We see an incident. And we kind of shop it around. We go like, if the three of us work for the same organization in different departments doing security, I'm like, hey Larry, like I saw this. Like, is there a case where like that would be normal? Like, Doug, what did you see with this incident? And a lot of times, as we all know, we'll be like, oh, that was the contractor that Doug just hired, and Doug's like, no, that's totally cool. So we can diffuse a lot of those threats with observability and communication.
data sharing.
I'll give you a real world example.
Yeah.
Of that. We had something like this happen at our home.
Yep.
That for over about an 8-month period at the end of our driveway, for whatever reason, all of a sudden a pair of underpants, ladies' underpants or a brassiere would show up.
Really?
Like-
I saw that at DerbyCon once, but that's a different story.
Like all of a sudden there'd be like a pair of underpants at the
I
end of the
swear
driveway.
it wasn't me.
And I'm like, this is odd. And so you pick it up with a stick because there's random underwear on the side of the road, right? And it's in your driveway. And the first time was okay, fine. So you pick it up with a stick and you put it in the trash can. And then the second time it happens, like, well, that's odd. And then the third time, like, this is not a coincidence.
I like how the thread is dirty underpants in your driveway.
It is literally, I swear to God, dirty underpants, bras, you name it.
For how long did this happen?
Dirty
Over about an 8-month period, we had about 6 pairs show up. And after the third pair, we put a camera
There's a
up.
camera there.
We put a camera up.
Yeah.
And we reported this on the local, after the third one,
Sure.
we put this on the local town Facebook group, and it got lots of coverage.
I bet.
And in fact, one of the
Coverage of the
reporters-
uncovering.
one of the reporters from the local town newspaper picked up on the Facebook story and put it in the local town paper.
God,
then-
you have a boring town.
Yeah,
Dude,
not-
we
mine
do.
just-
We do.
There's undergarments in someone's driveway. That's headline news.
And so one happened before the story went in the newspaper, and then the 5th one showed up, and I put it back on the town Facebook page. And by the way, we have a picture of the car on camera the second time, and they've been reported to the police for littering.
And that's how Larry'sLingerie.com got started.
But I only got 5 pair.
But wait, you never figured out why this person was putting undergarments?
I have my theories, which I will discuss off air.
Oh, I can't wait to hear these theories.
Oh,
But-
dear God.
dear.
All right. Real
But
quick, by the way,
it
for your
stopped.
RFC.
It stopped. After we reported, we communicated, and we had some monitoring.
We had a similar, it wasn't undergarments, but there was a car and a person that was observed in my neighborhood, and we're all kind of freaking out and checking our cameras and all this stuff. And one of my neighbors, thankfully, one day approached the person and was like, "Hey, can I help you with something?" And it turned out like it was just this older lady that was lost and like looking for someone's house or something, like totally innocuous, was like the nicest lady, and like was like, I'm just looking for like whatever. And she like
Looking
invited
for
her.
all my lost undergarments.
But she was like, I invited her in for like coffee and stuff. Like she was totally like just nice older lady that just needed help. Right.
That's how Mossad gets you, buddy. That's how Mossad.
I was just going to say the same thing.
And that's what I was thinking, right? I'm like, oh, we're totally screwed. Like
Yeah.
someone has socially engineered you.
Then he
You're
woke up
totally
in the
screwed.
police building in Turkey.
Yeah.
With some stitches
So,
and
by the way-
ice cubes, right?
Casey John Ellis replied on Twitter, and he said about that that
The
security.txt.
61 Yeah, Yeah.
He said that he has a long and storied history with that project. Easy mode is policymaker.disclose.io, and it includes DNSSecurityText.org as well. So it's not an RFC yet, but apparently they're doing one for DNS as well.
It's awesome.
Oh, yes.
Excellent.
Beautiful.
It's really cool stuff. Actually, that's really neat.
So, hey, I've got another story I want to cover real quick.
Let's do it.
Because what could possibly go wrong when we're talking about IoT? My story number 2.
Good Lord, we've covered Star Wars and undergarments in your driveway.
Yep. And
That's like, God.
so this particular is a tweet from Stefan Baral, and he's in an elevator, and he takes a picture and says, so I can scan the QR code, download the app, open the app, scan the QR code with the app to tell it what elevator I'm at, and then use it to call the elevator.
Operate this elevator from your smartphone.
Or I can push the button.
What could go wrong when they take the buttons out? Nothing could ever go wrong with that.
No.
What?
but
Holy crap.
So,
Can you use the app remotely?
so Tyler, that's the question. And you start reading this Twitter thread, and it's like, oh, yeah, no. So the app accesses your location, and if you're not in proximity to the elevator, it won't let you operate the elevator. And I'm like, well, just spoof the damn GPS. Spoof the GPS, or use your Android device with an app that changes your location. Because then this will have all sorts of fun. Because effectively, if like you're on the 6th floor, instead of pressing the button that you want to go down, you just use the app and it tells you you're on the 6th floor and you want to go down.
Mm-hmm.
So you set your approximate height and your location, and then you keep calling the elevator to the 6th floor, and no one else can use it.
Now we just need someone.
Or alternatively, stick a bad QR code on there that drops malware onto everybody in the building.
I like the way.
I mean, Jesus.
There's that.
Yep, Tyler, what did you say?
I said we just need someone that has access to the camera system in that elevator for some light testing.
Yeah, that was also things that people said. We just need the camera access to the
Totally.
camera.
What if the elevator has a debug mode and can go either between floors or all the way to the bottom or all the way to the top?
I think
Or what
more
if
testing is required.
But like, if you're gonna operate an elevator from your smartphone, does it give you the emergency stop button or emergency call button in the app, or is that still a physical button?
Or is
and
that
how many elevators? Wait. How many of you have gone in an elevator and your smartphone doesn't work well because you're effectively in a Faraday cage? What about the elevator phone that's supposed to be in every elevator? Oh, this is bad.
Those phones
is so good.
Those phones are not there. I hate to tell you this.
It's so good.
I really want to see if we can embed this app on the Linux device on the camera, so the location doesn't even matter. And if the QR code gets changed, then we can continually play with this for hidden functions.
Tyler, I love you.
Ripe for
What hotel is this?
Tyler, you're amazing.
Ripe for hacking.
I don't know.
As much as we love technology, sometimes it's too much.
Yep. I mean, I get it's got to be in Canada somewhere because the sign is both in English and in French. I get why they did this because COVID. Like, you don't want to touch the dirty elevator buttons, right? Because that's why they came out with these products with these little things that you can put on your keychain so you can press the buttons.
Yeah,
like you don't have to press the buttons. You can use your smartphone. Like
you do the same thing in a lot of the planes now, so you don't have to touch the buttons on the remote or the screen. You use your smartphone over the wireless that then connects to the TV that you're sitting in front of.
I think it's way overkill to avoid germs.
Yep.
Sorry, like I think you're
like, this brings me back to the whole Twitchy thing. Like, do you remember when the fingerprint reader came out on the iPhone?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, yeah, I didn't enroll any of my fingers.
Yep.
But you can still unlock your phone. Like, how do you do that? Well,
different body part.
Yep. I gotta go into the bathroom and unzip my pants, and then I'll use the.
Oh, you actually go in the bathroom for that?
I mean, he did because he was kind of shy.
Yeah, I was gonna say most of us would have just been like, yeah, okay, here, time to go.
Yep.
It's cold out.
The fingerprint has changed. No.
Does that mean if I use Larry's, does that make that 2-factor? I need him and
it does. Yeah, it actually counts. Yeah.
Yep.
As long as you don't look each other in the eye.
Well, 2-hand.
Wow. We went deep with that one.
Oh no.
Oh no.
That's what she said.
It's reached that point in the evening.
It has.
The FCC is calling on the other line.
No, they're not.
Oh, I think we're calling it. At this point, I want to thank everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
May the 4th be with you.
Amen.